Chapter 958. Wyrm didn't have any hope for the survivors, that was for sure. But what was contradictory was that Wyrm still had hope for the survivors. A certain righteous hero once said that when people say, impossible, there must be a glimmer of hope in their hearts. Although Wyrm wasn't human, he also had the same thought. So when Wyrm saw the scene in Nippur, Wyrm was filled with anger. There were too many red bloodstains around Nippur city, so much that it was enough to prove that there were no living people in Nippur city. Moreover, these bloodstains all indicated that what the citizens of Nippur city had experienced was a terrifying massacre brought about by magical beasts. So Wyrm didn't want to go down to investigate the situation. Instead, he prepared to launch an attack. When the hope in a person's heart was destroyed, who wouldn't be angry? Wyrm would be angry, but it was useless. Annihilating Nippur was the only way to save Nippur. Wyrm believed that if the patron saint of Nippur, Enlil, was here, he would agree with Wyrm's idea. Wyrm waved his hand, and golden ripples suddenly emerged from Wyrm's side. A bright white holy spear was spat out from it. This was the holy spear that Wyrm had obtained in the country of shadows. It was made from the core branch of the world tree. Although it wasn't comparable to King Arthur's holy spear, Luan Gomanyad, it represented a part of the Nordic world tree, so its status wasn't low. Although it had merged and separated from Funbaba, this spear had gone through the baptism of its origin with Wyrm. It was no longer the same as before. Holding Yggdrasil in a reverse grip, Wyrm raised it behind his back and pointed the tip of the spear at Nippur city diagonally below. Wyrm began to instill magic into Yggdrasil. Wyrm was ready to destroy Nippur completely with one attack. Kalas, correct the target and gather the mana. Yes, Master. Under Wyrm's command, Kalas, who was in a supporting magic attire, left. A few magic arrays suddenly appeared around Wyrm and slowly gathered on Yggdrasil. The magic array could allow Wyrm to aim at the center of Nippur more accurately. It could also gather Wyrm's mana to prevent the mana from leaking midway, making Yggdrasil more powerful. Noble Fantas dash, in an instant, the mana in Wyrm's body surged like a boiling ocean. Countless mana materialized and gathered on Yggdrasil in Wyrm's hand like a decorative ribbon dancing on the spear's body. Liberated dash, Yggdrasil seemed to have been stimulated. The shape of the tip and the end of the spear changed. Not only did it become longer and thicker, but it also became more sacred. Diagonally below, the magical beasts in Nippur, whether indoors or outdoors, all raised their heads in horror and looked in the direction of the huge mana in the sky. Their beastly instincts told them that they would probably die soon, the kind where not even dregs would be left. Yggdrasil. Wyrm's eyes suddenly turned golden, and he threw Yggdrasil like a javelin. Wyrm himself rose a lot because of the strong impact of Yggdrasil. The body of the Yggdrasil spear was surrounded by several auxiliary magic arrays. The colorful ribbons formed by magic power fluttered behind the end of the Yggdrasil spear. It was like a beautiful comet that was about to fall to the ground, and flew straight towards Nippur. As long as one had a discerning eye, they would be able to tell that this comet was flying towards the city center of Nippur. It seemed like it was going to hit the center of Nippur and destroy Nippur. Roar, countless magical beasts reacted and immediately began to run for their lives. They roared in fear as if they were panicking like the citizens of Nippur. However, the comet did not have any compassion for the magical beasts and still brought God's punishment over. At this moment, the ground shook. 10 huge ferocious snake heads suddenly broke out of the ground and aimed at the comet formed by Yggdrasil. These 10 snake heads shot out purple rays. In the southwest of Mesopotamia, in the tropical rainforest formed by the authority of the feathered god, countless red magical beasts rioted in the rainforest. The magical beasts shuttled through the rainforest and constantly rubbed against the vegetation of the rainforest, causing the rainforest to rustle as if a storm was coming. Roar! These magical beasts were covered with thick and short red hair. They had no eyes, and there were some tumor-like hair where the eyes were in the back of their heads. Their tails were raised high as if they relied on their tails to search for enemies. The teeth of these magical beasts were not sharp. It was enough to tell that they did not use their teeth to bite their prey. Instead, they used their thick claws to tear their enemies apart. There were traces of flames on their claws, as if they were about to burn. This was the magical beast Uxiumugil. It was a type of magical beast that was different from Ugiel and Ulidim. However, Uxiumugil was not the only magical beast in the rainforest. There were also some carnivorous orcs with leopard heads, wolf heads, and dog heads. Roar! The orcs wielded weapons like clubs and fought fearlessly against the magical beasts that swarmed in. Although they were not as large as the strengthened magical beasts, this rainforest was their territory. They were more familiar with this place than the magical beasts. Using the geographical advantage, the orcs were able to hold their ground. They were evenly matched with the magical beasts. However, even with the perfect geographical advantage, they still couldn't beat the human advantage. Although the orcs relied on their familiarity with the terrain to contend with the magical beasts, there were simply too many magical beasts, which caused the orcs to keep retreating. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before the orcs were forced to retreat to a dead end. Of course, there was another possibility, and that was if the magical beast commander personally took action. That would be much faster. Like now. Roar, roar, roar. A roar that was even more majestic than the roar of ordinary magic beasts came from afar. The orcs could only see rows of rainforest trees falling one after another. The earth was still shaking as if some terrifying tyrant had rushed to the battlefield. Sure enough, in the next second, a huge Uxiumugil that looked similar to the other Uxiumugil but was so huge that it struck fear in the orcs appeared in front of the orcs. However, there was one difference. This huge Uxiumugil had 3 sharp horns on its head, making the huge Uxiumugil, which looked like a lion, look like a triceratops. The orcs felt the enormous magic power of this gigantic Uxiumughar and came to a conclusion without a doubt. This was the prototype of the mass-produced Uxiumughar, one of the rare beast-type Uxiumughar commanders. Roar, roar, roar. The prototype Uxiumugil roared again. This roar was mixed with a large amount of mana, and countless orcs who were close by fainted from this roar. Not only that, but the surrounding trees also collapsed one after another, forming an open space full of fallen trees. It made the entire rainforest look much more spacious and bright. Simply put, the roar of the prototype Uxiumugil could be understood as the release of magical power, sound. The roar full of magical power pushed down the orcs and the surrounding trees. Countless Uxiumugil took this opportunity to pass by the orcs and rushed into the depths of the forest. This was the intention of the prototype Uxiumugil. Their enemy was not the orcs, but the commander of the orcs' commanders. That was, the master of this rainforest, the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl. Roar! A roar like that of both a tiger and a leopard came from the depths of the rainforest. Countless magical beasts trembled and froze on the ground after hearing it. This was the innate suppression of wild beasts. The fear of wild beasts meeting more powerful wild beasts was engraved in their DNA. The Uxiumugil knew that the roar came from an existence superior to them, so they did not dare to move forward. It had to be said that this was an interesting matter. No matter what, humans could not stop the attacks of the magical beasts, but a beast that was higher in level than the magical beasts could stop them in their tracks. It could only be said that it was really interesting. The prototype Uxiumugil was not surprised at all. Its big head shook at the surrounding Uxiumugil who had stopped. Although it did not have eyes, it gave people the feeling that it was examining these mass-produced Uxiumugil. Then, the prototype Uxiumugil let out a strange roar, as if it was rather disdainful of these mass-produced magical beasts. After all, this was not the first time it had encountered such a situation. It had led these mass-produced magical beasts to raid the rainforest several times before. Almost every time, these mass-produced Uxiumugil would be frightened by the roar that sounded like both a tiger and a leopard. Although it could force these mass-produced Uxiumugars to move again, as the original Uxiumugars really didn't want to see them in such a useless state anymore. At that moment, it no longer cared about these mass-produced creatures. Anyway, it could deal with the existence that let out that sound like both a tiger and a leopard by itself, so it might as well say that it had fought with the other party several times already. Just as the prototype Uxiumugel was pondering, a yellow-striped humanoid creature suddenly jumped from the trees in the dense forest towards the prototype Uxiumugel. The toy-like claw spear in its hand flashed dangerously as it viciously stabbed at the prototype Uxiumugel. Roar! As the prototype Uxiumugel roared, the claw spear that flashed dangerously did not hit the Uxiumugel's body. Instead, it hit the 3 horns on the Uxiumugel's head. Clang! The sound of clashing steel resounded in the surroundings, causing the mass-produced Uxiumugel, who were originally frightened, to collectively tremble. They slowly and carefully retreated, as if they were giving way to the leopard man and the prototype Uxiumugel to fight. That's right, the one who let out that sound like both a tiger and a leopard was the leopard man, who was dressed strangely and looked like a Kospali. She was also the commander of those orcs, and the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl was her commander. However, the claw spear that was violently rubbing against the 3 horns of the prototype Uxiumugel showed that the leopard man was not just a figurehead. It showed that she had god-level strength, and was comparable to Tiamat's direct descendant, the 11 Sons, one of the commanders of the magical beasts, Uxiumugel. But at this moment, Uxiumugel let out a mocking sound, which made the leopard man, who was close by, rather angry. Damn it! The leopard man roared in despair, then immediately used the reaction force of Uxiumugel to jump back to the rainforest in the distance where there were still trees. Then, the leopard man hung the claw spear in her hand on a book, opened her hands and placed them on her cheeks, and shouted at the sky. Cooker! I can't beat it. Come and help me. That's right, the leopard man was actually unable to beat Uxiumugel. They seemed to be evenly matched, but that was only because Uxiumugel was not serious. In fact, when Wyrm returned, Uxiumugel had been here for a long time. At that time, one of the commanders of the magical beasts, Ulidim, had actually come to support Uxiumugel, not to attack. When Wyrm and Gudatsi came to the southern jungle, the reason why they did not see Quetzalcoatl was because Quetzalcoatl was busy dealing with Uxiumugel. The reason why the leopard man, who had led the way for Gudatsi and the others, left after bringing Gudatsi and the others here was because he needed to help Quetzalcoatl deal with Uxiumugel. As for telling Gudatsi and the others, don't even think about it. Although the leopard man was not stupid, the leopard man's brain circuit was different from ordinary people and even ordinary servants. It was very similar to those berserkers. It was already good enough that she could go back to support Quetzalcoatl. It was basically impossible to expect her to report the information. If Wyrm was there at that time, maybe she could ask. Unfortunately, Wyrm was not there at that time. When Wyrm and Gudatsi met up, the leopard man had already left. Moreover, because Uxiumugel, one of the commanders of the magical beasts, attacked the southwest part of the jungle, which was quite a distance away from Wyrm and Gudatsi. So, whether it was Wyrm or Chaldea, they did not notice that Uxiumugel, one of the commanders of the magical beasts, was constantly attacking the jungle. At that time, the information that Merlin had obtained from Ulidim's mind was incomplete. As a result, the original Uxiumugel, one of the commanders of the magic beasts, had been staying near the southwest part of the southern forest to harass and attack the forest. He had really missed a good opportunity to retreat early. After that, the Uxiumugel had been attacking the forest intermittently until now. Chapter 959. The original plan of the monster commanders was to let the monster commanders lead an unimaginable number of monsters to attack the Uruk from all directions of Mesopotamia. Ulidim and Uxiumughar would attack Quetzalcoatl from the southwest, the Kururu would land from the southeast, Muzamaf and Ujar would mount a surprise attack from the northwest, and finally, Basumu and the mysterious existence using Enkidu's body would launch a frontal attack from the north. There were a total of 4 directions to encircle the Uruk. This was the plan formulated by the monster commanders after losing 4 monster commanders. The original plan was to use Uxiumughar and Ulidim, who were responsible for attacking the southwest, to launch an attack on Quetzalcoatl as a fuse to temporarily contain Quetzalcoatl. If possible, they would attract the attention of the Uruk side as much as possible. When the Uruk side's attention was diverted to this side, the other monster commanders would launch a joint attack from the Persian Gulf, Mount Abif, and the north to capture the Uruk in one fell swoop. After that, they would besiege Quetzalcoatl. As a result, Ulidim, who went to the southwest jungle to support Uxiu-Mughar, was bumped into by Wuming halfway. Moreover, he overestimated himself and wanted to devour Wuming. In the end, he was killed by Wuming and was forced to retreat. In this way, only Uxiu-Mughar was left as a monster commander in the southwest, and the plan to use him as a fuse to trigger the final battle had to be changed. The monsters had some kind of special connection with each other. If any monster commander died, the other monster commanders could sense it. The reason why the 10 servants in the previous decapitation operation were discovered so quickly was precisely because of this. In short, after Ulidim died, the monsters immediately changed their plan. They let Uxiu-Mughar continue to contain Quetzalcoatl, and let Musamaf and Ujar's monster army cross the mountains and go straight to the Uruk. At that time, the monsters in the north and the Persian Gulf could still temporarily ignore Quetzalcoatl and take down the Uruk. However, at that time, Musamaf and Ujar encountered Ishtar, who was pulled into the group by Wuming. After being replenished by Wuming's command spell, Ishtar, who was full of resentment, activated her noble phantasm and directly bombarded the monster army to the point that not even ashes were left. The two monster commanders, Musamaf and Ujar, also fell into the underworld. In the end, Ujar was killed by the goddess of the underworld, and Musamaf took the opportunity to escape. Quetzalcoatl, who was located in the jungle, needed to be contained, so even if they couldn't use it as a fuse, it didn't matter. However, if Ujar and Musamaf failed, it would really be a big crisis. Ishtar's golden star explosion penetrated the underworld, and directly became impassable. On the other hand, the monsters in the Persian Gulf were weak, and as a fuse, it seemed a bit unreliable and easy to be targeted by the humans. As a result, after a long time, they could only continue to attack from the north. When the monsters in the north were ready to attack, the monsters in the Persian Gulf also moved at the same time. After all, even if they couldn't surround the Uruk from all directions, attacking the Uruk from the north and the south at the same time was also a good choice. As the saying goes, the worst thing in a team battle is to lose the back line. When the beasts appear in the Persian Gulf, Uruk side will definitely become anxious, and the whole battle will definitely become advantageous to the beasts. However, Ujar, who was unwilling to be treated as a leftover material, took the initiative to attack the jungle. This attack could be said to be his biggest attack since coming to the jungle in the south. As a beast-shaped magical beast commander, Wushu Mughals' physique was even stronger than those human-shaped magical beast commanders. This was because Wushu Mughal had retained the essence of a wild beast. When faced with a hostile human or a beast, which was more terrifying, it was believed that basically everyone would say that the beast was the beast, because the beast's attack was not logical, that is, unexpected. Especially in a battle to the death, the intelligent human would often think of a way out, while the beast would pay attention to what was in front of them. The monster commanders in the human form also had such a drawback. They had the drawbacks that belonged to humans, and not only that. Even though the magical beast commanders were all magical beasts and enemies of humans, once they gained intelligence and had decent intelligence, it was inevitable that they would fall into the same lowly circle as humans, and that was forming cliques. Based on their appearance, the monster commanders were divided into human form and beast form. The humanoid magical beast commander believed that it was different from the mass-produced magical beasts and was superior to them. Moreover, the humanoid magical beast commander was indeed more in line with the term commander, unlike the pure magical beasts that were categorized as wild beasts. On the other hand, the monster commanders in the beast form believed that the beast form was the form of the monsters, superior, and they should not be proud of being different from other monsters. Similarly, the monster commanders in the beast form retained the essence of a beast. Compared to a commander, they were more like monsters. It had to be said that this was rather ironic, because it was very much like the so-called pro-emperor faction and pro-people faction. Those humanoid magical beast commanders boasted of their arrogance, and they made up the majority of the 11 magical beast commanders. Add to that the fact that some of the beast-type magical beast commanders didn't do anything, and some even switched sides. It could be said that the humanoid magical beast commanders looked down on beast-type magical beast commanders like Ulidim, and the lion-headed magical beast commander Ulidim was a classic example among classic examples. The kobold Ulidim had overestimated himself and wanted to devour Wyrm. The lion-headed Ulidim had also thought that the goddess of the underworld would not be able to do anything to him, but in the end, they had both been killed. Their deaths were caused by the common flaw of the monster commanders in the human form. Wyrm's multiple spells did not kill Ulidim, and Ereshkigal also had to expend some effort to kill Ulidim. From this, it could be seen that the two of them were indeed quite capable. If they had been more careful, they might not have left so easily. When they evolved into human form, they also inherited the weaknesses of humans. Arrogance, conceit, self-conceit, thinking that they had done something, and so on. And it was precisely these weaknesses that harmed them. Ulidim were the best examples. As for the fact that they looked down on the beast form magical beast commanders, although they didn't show it, all the magical beast commanders were well aware of it. Moreover, the best example was the reason why Wushio Mughar had brought those brainless mass-produced Wushio Mughar to the southwest border alone to deal with Quetzalcoatl. It was obvious that Ulidim had been isolated. Chapter 960. As for the fact that they looked down on the beast form demonic beast commanders, although they didn't show it, all the demonic beast commanders were well aware of it. Moreover, the reason why Uxiu Mughar alone brought those brainless mass-produced Uxiu Mughar to the southwest border to deal with Quetzalcoatl was the best example. It was clear that Uxiu Mughar had been isolated. Traveling from the northernmost fir forest to the southernmost forest, and being the fuse to launch the attack, this kind of tiring work could only be done by the unpopular beast form demonic beast commanders. And it just so happened that Uxiu Mughar had the strength and was also a beast form demonic beast commander. No matter what, he was fully qualified to come to the southwest border. But Uxiu Mughar probably didn't have good intentions for rushing over. The reason why Uxiu Mughar rushed over was probably because he needed to be the supervisor of the beast form demonic beast commander, just like the combination of Uxiu Mughar and Mughar. However, Mughar was the beast form demonic beast commander who had switched sides. Although he didn't express it clearly, Muzamaf, who was also a beast-type magical beast commander, had the intention of defecting to the side of the human-type magical beast commander. This made Uxiu Mughal, who had noticed this, feel extremely displeased. This was enough to show that the beast form demonic beast commander's camp was far inferior to the human form demonic beast commander's camp. Not only that, the reason why Mughar and Hughar led their mass-produced Mughar and Hughar to raid the Uruk was also because of the instigation, sarcasm, and ridicule of the human form demonic beast commanders. The main purpose of this matter was to test the fighting strength of the Uruk. Apart from that, it was also to make the beast form demonic beast commanders sacrifice one of their members, thus weakening the strength of the beast form demonic beast commanders. Although the beast form demonic beast commanders, Mughar and Hughar were the first to die, the human form demonic beast commanders also suffered many casualties. For example, the scorpion man Kitabliru and the bull Kasalik both died in the hands of the servants summoned by the human side, while the kobold Uxiu Mughar and the lion Uxiu Mughar were also killed. Currently, there were only 2 human form demonic beast commanders left. Although the beast form demonic beast commanders didn't do anything and had the intention of switching sides, even so, the advantage of the beast form demonic beast commanders was highlighted. Thinking of this, coupled with the current situation of personally participating in the battlefield, Uxiu Mughar felt even more delighted. The human form demonic beast commanders liked to command, while the beast form demonic beast commanders preferred to personally participate. Uxiu Mughar and Hughar and Ugar and Wyrm's attacks were probing attacks first. Hughar Mughar. If it were Uxiu Mughar, he would definitely choose to ambush and kill Hughar at the right time, unlike Uxiu Mughar. Of course, trash like the orcs in this forest couldn't arouse Uxiu Mughar's interest at all. Only existences like the leopard man could slightly arouse Uxiu-Mughar's interest. As for the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, Wuxiu-Mughar was even more interested in him. Quetzalcoatl was an opponent who was on par with him, or even stronger than him. But this didn't mean that he would be killed in an instant. He had fought with the Quetzalcoatl several times. Although he retreated first every time, he gradually became familiar with Quetzalcoatl's attacking style. The Quetzalcoatl goddess possessed strength that wasn't inferior to the mother goddess. Her fighting style was also as wild as a beast's. But that wasn't important. In short, the wildness of the human body was vividly displayed by the Quetzalcoatl goddess. At this thought, Uxiu-Mughar's blood couldn't help but boil. Roar, roar, roar. Uxiu-Mughar once again let out a roar filled with magic. This was a declaration of war against the enemy. And the wild-natured Quetzalcoatl goddess Quetzalcoatl naturally couldn't ignore Uxiu-Mughar's declaration of war. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. An object that Uxiu-Mughar couldn't see clearly spun and whizzed towards Uxiu-Mughar. However, Uxiu-Mughar didn't need to see it. He had fought with Quetzalcoatl several times before, so even if he couldn't see it, he already knew what it was. It was Quetzalcoatl's weapon. Clang! Uxiu-Mughar caught it with the 3 horns on his head and stuck it firmly in the middle of his 3 horns. After all, this was an old opponent, so he wouldn't be hit by this move again. But then, another blurry existence flew over. It was an existence even bigger than the weapon. It was a human figure. It was Quetzalcoatl. Ah! Quetzalcoatl's foot landed hard on Uxiu-Mughar's head, and it happened to hit Quetzalcoatl's own weapon. The powerful impact instantly kicked the handle of Quetzalcoatl's weapon, which was stuck between Uxiu-Mughar's 3 horns. This kick caused the atmosphere to tremble, and Uxiu-Mughar couldn't help but kneel down. Boom! Taking advantage of Uxiu-Mughar's temporary powerlessness, Quetzalcoatl instantly picked up her weapon and jumped back to the leopard man's side. Uxiu-Mughar slowly stood up from the extremely short period of powerlessness. This bit of damage wasn't enough to cause the slightest bit of damage to his powerful body. Crack! But at this moment, one of the 3 horns on Uxiu-Mughar's head made a cracking sound. This stunned Uxiu-Mughar. Then, Uxiu-Mughar's horn broke and fell to the ground in front of him. After fighting with you so many times, I've more or less figured out your fighting style. Quetzalcoatl said to Uxiu-Mughar in a lively and cheerful voice like a big sister next door. Uxiu-Mughar and Quetzalcoatl had fought a few times, and similarly, Quetzalcoatl had also fought with Uxiu-Mughar before. This was something that anyone could figure out. Since Uxiu-Mughar could analyze Quetzalcoatl from these few fights, there was no reason why Quetzalcoatl couldn't analyze Uxiu-Mughar, right? And this time, Quetzalcoatl broke Uxiu-Mughar's horn because of Quetzalcoatl's analysis of Uxiu-Mughar. But this time, Uxiu-Mughar was completely furious. Chapter 961. Uxiu-Mughar's body was quite tough. No matter how Quetzalcoatl hammered and wrestled, she could not cause any obvious damage to Uxiu-Mughar because his body took all the hits. This was the strength of a demonic beast commander. Their physical fitness was ridiculously high. As a beast-type demonic beast commander, Uxiu-Mughar's physical fitness was even higher than that of other humanoid demonic beast commanders. If it had to be expressed in terms of data, Uxiu-Mughar's durability might have reached the EX level. However, although Uxiu-Mughar could withstand Quetzalcoatl's attacks, the pain was still transmitted to his mind. Being able to withstand hits did not mean that it did not hurt. These were 2 different things. As one of the 3 goddesses, although Quetzalcoatl's attacks could not directly cause harm to Uxiu-Mughar who had an extremely high physical fitness, she could indirectly cause harm to him. It was precisely because the indirect damage accumulated to a certain extent that Uxiu-Mughar retreated. While Quetzalcoatl's attacks did not have much effect on Uxiu-Mughar, Uxiu-Mughar's attacks did not have much effect on Quetzalcoatl because he really could not catch up to her. Coupled with the terrain of the rainforest and his high agility, Uxiu-Mughar, who was constantly under attack, was the first to retreat every time. But both sides could not afford to waste time like this. Whether it was Uxiu-Mughar or Quizard-Coyotl, both sides were looking for each other's weaknesses. The first to act was Quizard-Coyotl. Since she could not cause harm to Uxiu-Mughar's tough body, she would attack the less tough parts. Quizard-Coyotl aimed at the 3 horns on Uxiu-Mughar's head. The 3 horns of Uxiu-Mughar, who was known as the Triceratops, were naturally not ordinary horns. Whether it was in terms of sharpness or toughness, they were comparable to the so-called divine weapons, just like Quizard-Coyotl's weapon, Makana. But there was a principle that Uxiu-Mughar did not understand, and that was the so-called overly tough makes it easy to break. Coincidentally, Quizard-Coyotl understood this principle. Quizard-Coyotl used her own weapon, Makana, in combination with her wrestling skills. Through the contrast of using softness to overcome toughness, she successfully kicked one of Uxiu-Mughar's horns off. Or rather, it was cut off by the vibration of the saw blade. While Wuxiu-Mughar was proud of his 3 horns, he also valued them very much. This was just like how many people valued their hairstyle. To Wuxiu-Mughar, these 3 horns were even more important than a damaged hairstyle. After all, the 3 horns were the proof of Uxiu-Mughar's strength. Quizard-Coyotl, who had broken one of Uxiu-Mughar's horns, had undoubtedly infuriated Uxiu-Mughar. Roar, roar, roar. Ignoring the remaining mass-produced Uxiu-Mughar in the surroundings, the original Uxiu-Mughar completely let the flow of magic in his body flow freely. A huge amount of magic mixed with this extremely high decibel roar spread in all directions. Many collapsed trees on the ground were shattered by the sound waves, and countless orcs and magical beasts were also affected by the roar. Their bodies directly exploded, and the scene became extremely bloody. Quizard-Coyotl's expression only changed and she frowned. She was not affected much, but the leopard man could not take it anymore. He covered his ears and fell from the tree. Gadatsi and the others, who had rushed over from behind, also heard the roar. Gadatsi, who was careless, directly knelt on the ground, holding her head as if it was about to split open. Matthew immediately raised his shield in front of Gadatsi. Moreover, the communication between Chaldea and Gadatsi even fluctuated, and thus became unstable. Tachika, that's, waving official, Hart, Roman, who was in Chaldea, only said a few vague words, and the communication was cut off. Hey, hey! Doctor! Dear Leonardo da Vinci! Gadatsi knelt on the ground, holding her head with one hand and looking at the communication device on her wrist with the other. She shouted for Chaldea, but no one picked up. This voice is full of magic. It seems that the roar just now cut off the connection between you and Chaldea, Merlin said as he helped Gadatsi, who was half kneeling on the ground, up. It seems like that's the case. Gadatsi was a little helpless. How could the connection between her and Chaldea always be cut off? This once again showed that Chaldea's equipment was slightly unreliable. Matthew, who was standing in front of Gadatsi and holding his shield to block the sound waves, turned to look at Gadatsi. Senior, what should we do now? Matthew used magic defense, which was similar to a magic release skill, to buff his shield and block the sound waves. There's no other way. Let's wait for the sound waves to stop before we go and take a look. This time, they flew to the city in the dense forest in a pterosaur that could carry people. After being drawn to the human side by Wuming, Quizard-Coyotl placed several large pterosaurs in the Uruk for the Uruk to perform emergency tasks, such as supporting a certain place. However, they did not expect that the first use of the pterosaurs placed in the Uruk by Quizard-Coyotl would be to support Quizard-Coyotl herself. Gilgamesh ordered Siduri to use the pterosaurs to bring Chaldea's people to the dense forest in the southwest. After receiving Quizard-Coyotl's order, the pterosaurs would recognize the aura of a few people and treat them as half-masters. Siduri was one of them. That was why Gilgamesh asked Siduri to bring Gadatsi and the others here. Just now, while the demonic beasts were resting, Quizard-Coyotl went to greet Chaldea's people and finally let Chaldea's people see the Quetzalcoatl goddess of the Three Goddesses Alliance. After that, the demonic beasts attacked again. The leopard man was the first to attack, followed by Quetzalcoatl. Gadotsi and the others who were slower than the two were left behind. By the way, Fufu was carried by Siduri and left in Eridu. Fortunately, Gadotsi and the others were left behind. Otherwise, if they had to bear the sound waves at such a close distance, Gadotsi would definitely not be able to withstand it. Even if she was lucky enough not to die, she would have fainted. Gadotsi was not a brainless protagonist in a hot-blooded manga. She was self-aware. Even if she could not help, she would not be a burden. That was why she proposed to wait for the sound waves to dissipate. Chapter 962. Although Gadotsi was worried about the feathered serpent god and the leopard man, she couldn't risk her life. Moreover, her decision would affect more than just her. Matthew, Merlin, and Anna would all be affected. As Gadotsi's descendant, Matthew would definitely support Gadotsi's decision. As for Merlin's words, it was best to leave them out for the time being. Anna doesn't have any objections, right? After that, Gadotsi looked at Anna, who had taken off her hood for some reason. Oh. Yeah. I'm fine with it. Anna's face turned red. She was obviously embarrassed to take off her hood in front of so many people. I heard that Anna often helps out at a flower shop. It seems that Anna has been interacting well with others in the Uruk. She doesn't wear a hood to cover her face anymore. Big brother Merlin, I'm really happy. Merlin took the opportunity to tease Anna. However, Anna immediately turned her head and glared at Merlin as if he was a cockroach. Then, Anna put her hood back on her head and raised the undying slaughter blade in her hand. It seemed like she wanted to slash Merlin with her scythe. It seemed that Anna wasn't joking. In order to prevent the existence of an ally, Merlin, from being slashed, Gadotsi immediately mediated and changed the topic. Speaking of which, the roar that's still radiating sound waves should be from the demonic beast commander, right? Since there was no way to continue approaching the leopard man and the feathered serpent god, Gadotsi wanted to organize the information first. Merlin, who had been in Uruk for half a year and had almost become a local, replied to Gadotsi, "That's right. To be able to let out such a roar, there's no one else other than the demon commander. I reckon that the demon commander is probably Uxiu Mughar, who has the nickname of Triceratops." The main reason was that the magical beast commanders who could make such a roar were basically all dead. Apart from Uxiu Mughar, there was no other type of magical beast commander that could make such a roar. After all, the other magical beast commanders were not of the right type, so it could only be Uxiu Mughar. So the magical beast commander is this powerful. Gadotsi couldn't help but look in the direction where the sound waves were still coming from. After today's experience, Gadotsi had a new understanding of the demonic beast commander, which was definitely stronger than most of the servants. Moreover, the roar of the commander of the beasts could make Gadotsi almost fall into a coma. If the commanders of the beasts attacked the north wall together, then would the north wall be able to persist until now? Gadotsi had such doubts. Merlin, who saw the doubts in Gadotsi's eyes, acted as a caring big brother. "Indeed, this is very strange for you, Fujimaru." Walking to the side of the clean ground, Merlin sat cross-legged with the staff in his hand, and then continued to speak. "So, Fujimaru, what do you think is the ultimate goal of the beasts? Who is the enemy of the beasts? Isn't it to destroy the humans and seize the Uruk's holy grail?" Gadotsi didn't think and directly blurted out. To be honest, she felt that Merlin's question was full of questions. Wasn't Gorgon's purpose already clear? Is that really the case? Merlin could not help but smile. So, if the humans are wiped out and the Holy Grail in King Gilgamesh's treasury is in their hands, will Gorgon really win? Is it not? Gadotsi was completely confused. Wasn't Gorgon's purpose to destroy the humans? Destroy the humans of this era and seize the Holy Grail in Gilgamesh's treasury. In this way, the reason of humanity will be destroyed. However, at this moment, Anna suddenly spoke. The other two goddesses will not allow Gorgon to do this. Seeing that everyone's attention had been attracted, Anna couldn't help but tighten her hood and didn't say anything else. Just as Anna said, the other two goddesses in the Three Goddesses Alliance will not allow it. Merlin spread out his hands. The Three Goddesses Alliance is nominally a joint attack on the Uruk and humans, but in fact, it is a contract made by the three parties to restrain each other. In other words, the Three Goddesses Alliance was not an alliance from the beginning, but an enemy relationship? Gadatsi nodded. The three parties will temporarily stop fighting with each other and use their own methods to take down the Uruk without affecting the other two goddesses. The winner will have the ownership of this land. However, whether it is Gorgon, Ereshkigal, or even Quetzalcoatl, they will not really give up. After that, the three parties will definitely start fighting again to see who will finally obtain the ownership of this land. Gorgon is only accumulating strength to deal with the other two goddesses. That's right, destroying the humans and Mesopotamia is only Gorgon's idea. Whether it is Ereshkigal or Quetzalcoatl, they do not have the idea of destroying the humans and Mesopotamia. Then, Merlin briefly explained Gorgon's general plan. For Gorgon, the humans are not the enemy, but the pests that need to be destroyed. The real enemy is the other two goddesses. Therefore, the magical beast commanders think that the humans are in the bag and do not need to deal with them too seriously. They only need to deal with the humans slowly and wait for the magical beasts to reproduce. When the magical beasts reach a certain number, they can destroy the humans and the other two goddesses together. Gorgon cannot directly attack Quetzalcoatl, but he can use the magical beast commanders under his command to contain the Uruk. After that, when the other magical beast commanders break through the Uruk and obtain the Uruk, the contract of the three goddesses will naturally collapse. At that time, Gorgon will naturally besiege Quetzalcoatl with several magical beast commanders, and the Quetzalcoatl will definitely be in the bag. As for Ereshkigal, she can't leave the underworld at all. She can be dealt with last, or not at all. Anyway, Gorgon's purpose is to destroy Mesopotamia. If Ereshkigal can't come to the surface to affect her, then Gorgon will not care at all. She only needs to destroy the humans on the surface. That's about it. Merlin nodded with satisfaction at his speech. Wait. Wait a minute, Mr. Merlin. Matthew, who was still carrying the shield, could not help but turn his head to look at Merlin. It can't be helped. Merlin's speech is too shocking. How do you know about the magical beast's plan? Chapter 963. Gadatsi grabbed Merlin's neck and made a sound full of surprise. Let go. It's broken. It's going to break. Merlin rolled his eyes. For some reason, Gadatsi's excitement made him so strong that Merlin, a servant, could not break free. Gadatsi, who realized the problem, immediately let go of Merlin and apologized shyly. Sorry. Cough, cough, cough. Merlin, who was lying on the ground, touched his chest and couldn't help but sigh. I'm saved, Merlin, don't change the topic. Anna said while putting Harpa's scythe under Merlin's neck. Calm down, Anna. Are you going to kill me? Merlin was so scared that he didn't dare to move. This immortal slaughtering blade had a special effect on immortal creatures. Although Merlin had relied on half of the dream demon bloodline to survive, he did not want to gamble on whether he was considered an immortal creature or not. Whether the scythe would have any effect on him, he did not want to take the risk at all. He did not want to suffer such a blow. Merlin was very afraid of pain. Even when he bit his tongue while chanting, he would feel pain for a while. I can now cut you down as if you're in cahoots with the demonic beasts. What else do you want to say? Anna's small and cold voice was a little bit cold. Looking at Anna's eyes that were filled with coldness, Merlin could feel that if he did not explain himself clearly, Anna would really slash him with a knife. After all, Anna wanted to cut Merlin for a while, so she could take this opportunity to get rid of him. All of this is my own speculation. I extracted some information from one of the commanders of the demons, Ulidim. In addition, Quizzer, who is also a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance with Gorgon, told me something. That's why I was able to speculate. In order to prevent people from not understanding, Merlin explained in detail. After all, the plan made by the demonic beast commanders is not a top-secret plan. As long as you know that the demonic beasts will attack the Uruk from different places, then this plan will become an easy-to-understand open conspiracy. Merlin raised his hands and kept a surrendering look. Anna, can you move this away from my neck? Merlin looked at Anna with a smile and moved Harpa's scythe with his hand. You escaped, Anna said and took back the scythe from Merlin's neck. When Merlin finally calmed down, Gadotsi discovered something. Wait a minute, Merlin, in other words, assassin also knows. After all, Wuming was the one who killed Ulidim. Since Merlin could extract information from Ulidim, there was no reason that Wuming didn't know about it. Yes, that's it. Merlin patted his sleeves and put his hand on his forehead to observe. The sound wave has almost stopped, let's go. Merlin finished and strode forward. Wait a minute. Merlin, why didn't Assassin and you tell us such important information earlier? Gadotsi, who quickly followed Merlin, asked Merlin loudly. Varen Senpai's words probably have his own reasons. Mashu, who had put away her shield, walked to Gadotsi's side and said her opinion. That's right. After all, the number of demonic beasts commanders has changed, so the demonic beasts plan will inevitably change. Villo just reserved his opinion. But Merlin, it must be because of his bad taste. Anna followed behind the three and looked at Merlin with disdain. Ah, that's too much, Anna. But Anna answered Merlin seriously. Go to hell, Merlin. Yes. Matthew, who couldn't stand it anymore, interrupted the conversation between the two. The battlefield is in front, is it really okay to be so casual? Forget it, Matthew, don't worry about Merlin. After all, Gadotsi and the others already knew about Merlin's indecent behavior. Yes, Senior. But, I don't know how Assassin and the North Wall are doing now, I'm so worried. Miss Gadotsi, who was distracted after saying that Merlin was indecent. At that moment, Matthew could only remain silent. But that feeling of helplessness filled Matthew's face. This way, there really isn't a problem, right? Outside the North Wall, in the sky above Nippur City. Wuming silently looked at the ray that deflected his noble phantasm's attack, and his face turned pale. Before his Yggdrasil hit Nippur City, it was deflected by the rays released by a few giant snake heads that suddenly emerged from the hills of Nippur City. As a result, Yggdrasil only hit half of Nippur City, and half of the demonic beasts seemed to have received an order to gather on the other half of Nippur City. This caused basically no demonic beasts to be killed by this noble phantasm. Yggdrasil landed on the ground and caused a huge explosion. The smoke was dispersed by the natural wind towards the other half of Nippur City, and the dispersed Nippur City was full of mystery. He grabbed Yggdrasil, who had automatically flown back from the ground, and with a swing of his spear, he put Yggdrasil back into his Dragoness space. This is not good, Kalas, how are your preparations going? I still need some time, Master. Hearing Kalas's words, Wuming gave up on a certain idea. If that's the case, let me think of a way to get through this by myself. The difficulty that Wuming was talking about was the few huge snakeheads that had shot Yggdrasil's ray that deviated from its course. Wuming had seen those snakeheads before. They were formed by Gorgon's hair. Wuming had been in close contact with Gorgon last time, so he definitely would not be mistaken. An ethereal voice like that of a god echoed in the sky as if it came from all directions. Wuming clearly recognized that the voice came from Nippur City below. It was just that the other party had used magic to make the voice sound like it came from all directions. However, Wuming was very confused about the voice. From the sound of it, it seemed to be Gorgon's voice, but Gorgon would not make such meaningless shouts. Gorgon, just half a year shouldn't be enough for you to recover from your injuries. After all, Gorgon said that she would not step out of her blood shrine until she recovered from her injuries. Wuming was also very clear that even if Gorgon had the Holy Grail, it was impossible for her to recover from her injuries in such a short period of time. This was because the injuries that Wuming inflicted on Gorgon were caused by his origin force. For Gorgon, who had the origin black soil, Wuming's attack went deep into his bones. The magic provided by the Holy Grail that Gydia created was not enough to heal him. If that was the case, why did Gorgon come here? Why did he make that song-like sound? Chapter 964. Gorgon wouldn't lie to herself. Even if she was a magical creature, she wouldn't go back on her words. It should be said that it was because she was a magical creature that she wouldn't go back on her words. In the stories of people and things outside of humans, the ones who would go back on their words were usually the humans, which was quite ironic. Moreover, Gorgon had now inherited Tiamat's authority. She was now the goddess of magical beasts, and this identity wouldn't allow Gorgon to go back on her words. This had already escalated to a matter of dignity. What's the matter? We've had a death match before. Aren't you prepared to come out and meet this old friend of yours? However, Gorgon didn't react at all, as if she didn't hear him. In that case, Wuming said and raised a hand. For victory, come to me quickly. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed. Horses with enough intelligence, bring me the light will that symbolizes your master. Wuming immediately used his authority, the incarnation of the sun. A scorching fireball suddenly appeared on Wuming's palm, then suddenly expanded. The originally palm-sized fireball instantly became dozens of times larger, and the massive magic power it emitted made one wonder if there was a holy grail stuffed inside. At that moment, Wuming, who was holding the sun, also appeared rather small. Since you're not coming out, then let me invite you out. Wuming exerted strength from his waist, and the hand holding the sun instantly swung downward. The sun, in that hand, was controlled by Wuming's telekinesis and fell to the ground extremely slowly. Why did he have to land slowly? Because Wuming wanted to see how these magical beasts would meet their end. TSK TSK TSK, like a heavenly fire descending to the world, the bizarre temperature of the sun scorched the ground, causing it to dry up and crack open. Even the magical beasts directly collapsed to the ground, emitting an unknown gas all over their bodies. Their bodies gradually shriveled and burned, and they couldn't be more dead. Paralysis was due to the high temperature. The unknown gas was due to the aroma of meat emitted by the high temperature. The shriveled body was due to the evaporation of the moisture in the body by Wuming's sun. The burning was due to the extremely dry fur spontaneously combusting in the extreme heat. Even the smoke caused by Yggdrasil's explosion was quickly disappearing. Gradually, the city that was dyed red by the high temperature and began to burn gradually revealed itself. Because there were no longer any human beings in Nippur, and there were no signs of human habitation nearby, Wuming infused the incarnation of the sun with a lot of magic power. When there was no one around and he did not care about the gains and losses, Wuming could totally unleash his ultimate move, just like what he did to Ulidim back then. This was also the reason why Wuming wanted to come alone. In an instant, the entire city of Nippur became a city of flames. This reminded Wuming of the burning city of Winterwood where he met Godatsi and the rest. The smoke disappeared completely. Apart from the flames, there was nothing else in the entire city of Nippur. Gorgon was also nowhere to be seen, leaving only a few holes on the ground. It was obvious that Gorgon had only revealed his head that was full of snake heads, and his real body was still underground. Since you don't want to come out, then I don't have to worry about it. Wuming snorted and removed the control of the sun incarnation. Suddenly, the entire sun incarnation turned into a meteor that was about to fall to the ground. In the next second, the meteor fell, and Nippur finally fulfilled Wuming's wish and exploded. Boom! Flames completely covered Nippur, and the city that was originally built on hills was now completely flattened. Much of the land had even turned into magma due to the high temperature. The loud explosion carried a strong penetrating force as though it could penetrate one's ears. However, Wuming, who was in the range of the explosion, did not even blink. He silently looked at the completely transformed Nippur that was covered in flames and magma. Although his sun incarnation was indeed powerful enough to be used as a trump card, Wuming did not think that Gorgon would die under this move. Otherwise, Gorgon would be too easy to deal with. As expected, Gorgon's strange screams came from the magma and flames again. However, as though it was a counterattack, the screams this time were filled with magic. The magma exploded, the flames were extinguished, and thick smoke billowed into the air. "You're out." Wuming calmed himself down. However, in the next second, several silver-white chains rushed out from the thick smoke. Clang! Several chains with silver wedges at the end swept toward Wuming at a speed faster than the naked eye could see. However, these silver-white chains were greeted by silver-white chains with specks of gold. Clang 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 clang. The ends of the chains with specks of gold also had wedges in the same shape as the silver chains. The wedges collided directly with the wedges, and a crisp sound was transmitted from the wedges to the chains for a long time. These chains with specks of gold extended from Wuming's arm. Wuming's arm that originally had nothing on it was now wrapped with a golden chain. At the same time, golden ripples appeared around Wuming, and several golden chains extended from it. Including the one on Wuming's arm, the number of golden chains was exactly the same as the silver-white chains that attacked him. The silver-white chains paused in the air for a moment, as though their users were stunned. Then, several silver-white chains turned into golden particles and dissipated, as though they were abandoned after being used up. This was quite similar to Gilgamesh's fighting style. At the same time, the chains that extended from the golden ripples around Wuming were also retracted. Whether it was Enkidu's automatic attack or the golden ripples around Wuming, they were all Enkidu's own ideas. Wuming didn't interfere at all. "Enkidu, are you okay?" Wuming, who had already guessed who attacked him with the chains, was rather worried about Enkidu. After all, in a sense, Enkidu was fighting with him just now. That's right, the silver-white chains that attacked Wuming just now were the fake ones that Wuming saw when he left the arena last time. The fake Enkidu who stole Enkidu's body. Clang clang clang, Enkidu didn't say anything. Instead, the chain that represented her gently touched Wuming's cheek, as if to say that she was fine, or as if to comfort Wuming. Enkidu knew that fighting with someone who stole her body was the last thing that Wuming wanted to see. Because, even if only the body was Enkidu, it was still Enkidu. Chapter 965. Don't worry about me. Although I'll show mercy to the person using your body, I won't put myself in danger. Moreover, then, Wuming looked down at the place where the chain had come out from. I'm afraid the opponent won't hurt me. First of all, the real purpose of the chain wasn't to pierce the enemy, but to bind the enemy. This was a very important point. Of course, piercing the enemy was also possible, but Wuming didn't think that he would be pierced. In order to prove this point, Wuming didn't move at all. He didn't defend, counterattack, or even dodge. Wuming wanted to see if the chain would bind him. Wuming bet that there was a 99% chance that the chain would bind him instead of piercing him. As for why Wuming felt that nothing would happen to him, and why was he so confident that the opponent wouldn't hurt him? That was because even if the opponent wasn't Enkidu on the inside, the body was still Enkidu. Wuming believed that as long as it was Enkidu, the opponent wouldn't hurt him. Why was Wuming so sure? There had to be some evidence, right? Last time, when Wuming was forced to leave, the fake Enkidu had developed feelings for Wuming. Wuming wasn't a block of wood, and he wasn't someone who couldn't see the details. That was why Wuming had seen everything clearly. It seemed like the opponent's body was affected by using Enkidu, which was why he developed feelings for Wuming. However, it was up to the opponent to decide what would happen. That was why Wuming wanted to do an experiment to see what the fake Enkidu would do to him. In the end, perhaps because he saw himself attacking Wuming, Enkidu couldn't hold back and attacked, which disrupted Wuming's plan. You should at least believe in yourself. After all, that's your body. I don't think the other party will do anything to me. After hearing Wuming's words, Enkidu's chain drooped down, as if he was sad to be lectured by Wuming. Alright, I'm not blaming you. Be good. Enkidu gently stroked the chain and regained his vitality. After that, Enkidu once again wrapped around Wuming's body, but this time, he didn't conceal himself. Enkidu also knew that Kalis was busy, so he let her assist Wuming. The heavenly lock that had undergone an extraordinary transformation was the best weapon against deities. It's about time. Wuming was naturally referring to Gorgon. In the thick smoke below, Enkidu was half kneeling on the scorched ground with one hand covering his head and the other supporting his body on the ground. It was obvious that he was greatly traumatized. "That's the real Enkidu," Enkidu said with a trembling voice, as if he was affected by the short exchange with the real Enkidu. A voice covered in magic came from the ground, and the ground covered in smoke started to crack, as if something was about to come out. So he subconsciously counterattacked because of the other party's attack. Enkidu frowned as he thought of something. Then let him cause a scene. Enkidu stood up and tried to look at Wuming through the smoke, but the magic in the smoke made Enkidu's vision quite blurry. Ugh! Enkidu couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. After confirming that there was something wrong with him, Enkidu decided to leave this place. The demonic beasts here have been wiped out. He was ready to go to other places to gather the demonic beasts and attack the north wall together with the commander. As for Wuming, he would leave it to her to deal with him. At this moment, from Wuming's perspective, a green-haired figure in white suddenly came out of the smoke and flew towards the north wall. Trying to run. Although his plan didn't come to fruition, the fact that the guy using Enkidu's body was able to escape proved that his plan was partially correct. At the very least, he could tell that the other party really didn't want to attack Wuming. But how could Wuming just watch Enkidu leave? Immediately, Wuming increased his telekinesis to control his body and tried to follow Enkidu. However, an attack came out of the smoke. A black ray of destruction was shot out. Luckily, Wuming stopped in time, or else he would have been hit. It's different from the previous ray. The purple ray that stopped Wuming's sun transformation was different. This time, the black ray made Wuming feel very dangerous. It's the ray of the demon eye of petrification. Last time when Wuming fought with Gorgon, Gorgon's magic eye of petrification was ineffective against Wuming after he revealed his true form. Now, Wuming's spiritual base wasn't as strong as it was when he revealed his true form. If he was hit by this ray of petrification, he would gradually turn into stone, but the speed would be as slow as a curse. Moreover, the ray shot out by Gorgon's magic eye of petrification not only had the effect of petrification, but it also had a great destructive power, just like the purple ray that Gorgon used before. The purple ray that was formed by pure magic had the power to shift Wuming's sun transformation. Although it didn't seem like a big deal, Wuming was very clear about it. After all, it was his own incarnation that was shifted. In Wuming's view, the sun incarnation that was in free fall wouldn't be shifted so easily. Gorgon used the purple ray to destroy a corner of the sun incarnation, causing the sun incarnation to shift in an unbalanced state. Obviously, Gorgon's ray had a very powerful destructive power, otherwise it would be impossible to destroy Wuming's attack. The magic eye of petrification just now was even more so. Through the petrification ray, Wuming could feel that if Wuming was hit, he would probably be knocked away. It didn't seem to be anything special, but that was only for Wuming. If a human was hit by that attack, they probably wouldn't even be petrified and would be completely destroyed. Really, you don't show up when you should, but show up when you shouldn't. Before, Gorgon was provoked by Wuming and didn't show up, but when Wuming was ready to chase Enkidu, she showed up again. Then, you and I will take advantage of this to decide the winner. After saying that, Wuming waved his hand, and several phalanxes appeared behind Wuming. It was the Manchala phalanx. Immediately afterward, the Manchala phalanx condensed and turned into a holy sword that looked very much like the Excalibur. This was the divine sword of salvation, the divine sword of salvation that was specially used to kill the demon king. Today, let me see if my divine sword of salvation can kill you, Gorgon. Chapter 966. What responded to Wuming was Gorgon's strange cry again. After hearing it a few times, Wuming even felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Not only that, but several black petrification rays with a diameter of a few meters were also ejected from the thick fog. Wyrm raised the Savior Divine Blade high. Lightning flashed on the blade of the Savior Divine Blade, and it emitted a rather strange pale light. Clang, the sound of a sword being unsheathed came from the Savior Divine Blade. Then, Wyrm slashed the Savior Divine Blade at the incoming petrification rays. Countless lightning bolts collided with Gorgon's petrification rays and cut them vertically from the middle like a hot knife cutting through butter. After that, the power of the lightning bolts from the Savior Divine Blade did not weaken at all and rushed toward Gorgon in the thick fog. The thick fog was instantly split apart by the lightning bolts from the Savior Divine Blade and spread to both sides. The lightning bolts from the Savior Divine Blade finally slashed at Gorgon's tail. Although the Savior Divine Blade's attack had power left after cutting through Gorgon's petrification rays, it was not enough to cause fatal damage to Gorgon. Gorgon used his thick and tough tail to block the attack from Wyrm's Savior Divine Blade. Gorgon's tail was torn open. The power of the lightning bolts made Gorgon's cracked tail look like roasted meat. Wyrm even saw that part of Gorgon's wound was similar to cooked meat. Wyrm even wondered if he could smell the fragrance of meat if he was close enough. But then, Wyrm had a trace of doubt. Gorgon's wound had not healed. This was impossible for Gorgon, who had Tiamat's authority. Tiamat's authority would allow Gorgon to recover quickly. Last time, Gorgon did not recover because Wyrm's injury was caused by a trace of black mud in Gorgon's body. That was why he could not recover. But now, Gorgon did not have the slightest trace of the black mud in his body. Even if the Savior Divine Blade had a trace of origin power, this should not be the result. Then, Wyrm noticed something wrong again. Wait! What's that? A pair of huge and curved horns grew on Gorgon's head. Gorgon's tail could block Gorgon's body and face, but it could not block the horns. Gorgon slowly lowered his tail, causing the air to tremble. Because the thick fog had completely disappeared, a new Gorgon appeared in front of Wyrm. He still had the upper body of a woman and the lower body of a snake. His entire body was covered in purplish-black scales. A pair of angelic wings with golden feathers curled up behind his back. Countless long purple hair turned into giant purple snakes that swaggered around Gorgon. It could be said that apart from the addition of the huge pair of curled horns on Gorgon's head, Gorgon did not change at all. Gorgon's eyes were still the same square petrified eyes, but his eyes seemed to have lost their light as if he had lost his self-consciousness. Gorgon raised his head and looked at Wyrm with his lifeless eyes. Then, he slowly opened his mouth, revealing a mouthful of thin but sharp fangs. The special sound from before came out of Gorgon's mouth again, and the effect was more obvious than before. The sound, which was stronger than the sound wave, spread out in a manner visible to the naked eye with Gorgon as the center. Everything that was affected was crushed and flattened. The city of Nippur, which was originally filled with charred ground and dark ruins, was instantly razed to the ground. It even went a few meters underground. Wyrm could even see the dark underground passage where Gorgon was hiding. However, the sound wave did not diminish and continued to spread to the surroundings. The grassy land and specially opened roads outside Nippur instantly disappeared. Probably because the sound wave had weakened, the land was not dug up like in Nippur. However, it was not much better because after the sound wave, only bare land was left. Wyrm, who was flying in the sky, was also affected. The sound wave made him take a few steps back. Wyrm put down the arm in front of him that was used to block the sound wave, then comforted the restless Enkidu. He looked at Gorgon with a serious expression. This guy was no longer Gorgon. Wyrm knew this very well. This guy is Tiamat. When Wyrm said this, Enkidu's heaven lock became even more restless, as if he agreed with Wyrm's words. Wyrm had indeed never seen Tiamat. After all, when Wyrm came to the Mesopotamia and Uruk, Tiamat had already been divided into heaven and earth by the gods of the Sumer and banished to the void dimension. Therefore, Wyrm did not have the opportunity to see Tiamat. However, Wuming had once entered the mirror world to retrieve his class card, and entering the mirror world required passing through the void dimension. Coincidentally, at the last time, in order to retrieve Gilgamesh's class card, Wuming, Elia, Mayu, Bazette, and the others entered the mirror world together. When passing through the void dimension, Wuming inadvertently heard a voice that sounded like a poignant but beautiful song. Moreover, when Wuming returned to the Mesopotamia last time, he also dreamed of Tiamat when he was sleeping by the roadside in the south. At that time, the voice in his dream was the same as the one he heard when passing through the void dimension. They were both poignant but beautiful songs. Now that he thought about it carefully, if he ignored Gorgon's mature voice, the voice that Gorgon was making at this moment could be said to be exactly the same as Tiamat's voice. So, the current Gorgon was actually Tiamat, the true goddess of the monsters. The only change that happened to Gorgon's body could prove this point. The huge pair of twisted horns on his head was obviously not something that Gorgon could have. There were no rumors in Greek mythology of monsters with such strange horns that could petrify people. There were no such records in the adapted stories or the Orthodox myths. The only difference between Gorgon at this singularity was that he had accepted Tiamat's authority. Obviously, the current Gorgon had indeed been assimilated by Tiamat. No wonder you can reproduce monster commanders that are several times stronger than servants. Wuming now understood how the strengthening type monsters and monster commanders came about. About 3 months ago, or even earlier, Gorgon, who was recuperating in the blood shrine and possessed Tiamat's authority, was assimilated by Tiamat's authority for some reasons that Wuming did not know. Chapter 967. Although there was only a slight difference in her appearance, she had been completely assimilated by Tiamat. It wouldn't be wrong to say that she was Tiamat now. The pair of huge and twisted horns were undoubtedly part of Tiamat's body, which was rumored to have a dragon's body. Moreover, looking at Gorgon's lifeless eyes, Wuming wasn't sure if he had completely lost his self-awareness. At least, that was what Wuming thought. At this moment, Gorgon didn't have the aura of an avenger. Instead, he was filled with motherly instincts, like a mother who overly spoiled her child. Wuming guessed that this assimilation probably occurred 3 months ago or even earlier. After that, Gorgon, who was assimilated by Tiamat, produced 10 powerful magical beast commanders. Together with the fake Enkidu, they formed a lineup of 11 magical beast commanders, which symbolized the 11 sons of Tiamat. But what puzzled Wuming was, what exactly caused Gorgon to be assimilated by Tiamat's authority? When Gorgon used Tiamat's authority to fight against Wuming, Wuming didn't see anything wrong with it. Gorgon looked as if he was completely in control of Tiamat's authority. Could it be that Gorgon's control over Tiamat's authority weakened after fighting with Wuming, which caused Gorgon to be assimilated by Tiamat's authority? Or was there some other reason, such as the unknown person who used Enkidu's body? No matter what, Gorgon is no longer Gorgon, but Tiamat. However, there was still one thing that Wuming was puzzled about. Gorgon's injuries hadn't healed on their own. Wuming slashed at Gorgon with the blade of salvation, but Gorgon blocked it with its tail. Naturally, there was a crack on its tail, and it had not recovered yet. In fact, there was no sign of recovery at all. This was very strange. Even if I'm assimilated, I shouldn't be unable to use authority, right? Wuming wondered. The assimilated Gorgon did not mean that he was no longer Gorgon. It was just that Tiamat was added to the foundation of Gorgon. Gorgon's consciousness was suppressed or disappeared because he could not defeat Tiamat. The one controlling Gorgon's body was probably Tiamat. However, this body's abilities shouldn't have disappeared, so why didn't the wound on Gorgon's tail heal? Wuming had no idea what was going on. Then, Wuming looked in the direction where the fake Enkidu left. That guy should know what's going on. Unfortunately, that guy escaped, and Wuming was now entangled with Gorgon, who was controlled by Tiamat, so he couldn't chase after him and ask for an explanation. However, Wuming didn't have time to think about it, because Gorgon, who was controlled by Tiamat, started attacking again. As Gorgon sang, several dark purple magic circles appeared in front of Gorgon's head, or more accurately, in front of Gorgon's eyes. Then, a black ray of light shot out from the magic circles towards Wuming. Not only that, but the snake heads formed by Gorgon's hair were also brewing and shooting out the same black ray from time to time. Although these rays were not as big as the black ray of light, Wuming knew very well that these rays were petrification rays that could petrify people. Whoosh! Wuming's rapid movement caused the atmosphere to tremble. Wuming danced in the black ray of light and flew towards Gorgon below. Wuming used the Sword of Salvation to block the black ray from time to time, cut it from time to time, and dodge it from time to time. Gorgon's petrification rays did not affect Wuming at all. Since there was no time for Wuming to think, Wuming decided not to think. Isn't Gorgon unable to heal himself? So let's cut Gorgon first before we talk about it. Wuming approached Gorgon bit by bit. Gorgon's countless snake heads attacked Wuming like giant pythons that could eat a person in one bite. In the next second, Wuming's celestial lock extended, split, and lengthened, piercing or binding the snake heads. Enkidu, who had the property of restraining gods, was very effective against Gorgon's hair. Wuming, on the other hand, moved towards Gorgon's head step by step along the snake heads. Wuming used the martial arts engraved in his bones to cut Gorgon's snake heads up and down. Countless purple blood-like liquid flowed out of the snake heads. While dodging the purple blood, Wuming also paid attention to the petrification rays that were shot at him from time to time. After all, not all of the snake heads were biting Wuming. Many of them were charging up power to release petrification rays from afar. However, these petrification rays were either blocked by Wuming's Sword of Salvation or dodged sideways. As a result, Gorgon could not catch or stop Wuming at all. It could only watch as Wuming approached it bit by bit. However, it was fortunate that the snake heads killed by Wuming were in a state where they could not be restored, just like Gorgon. Otherwise, Wuming would have a much harder time moving forward. The obstruction brought by the snake heads that could be restored infinitely and the obstruction brought by the snake heads that could not be restored were two different levels. After all, if it was the latter, the number of snake heads obstructing Wuming would gradually decrease. But even if it was the former, Wuming was not afraid at all. After all, he was a warrior trained by the Queen of the Country of Shadows, Skaha. Not only did he not drop his guard against the snake heads around him, but he also swam through the sea of snake heads with ease. If Musasobo Benkei and Nuwakamaru saw this, they would definitely be full of praise for Wuming's skills. Wuming's martial arts were basically shelved because of Wuming's fighting style, but this did not mean that Wuming forgot the martial arts he learned, or that Wuming did not know how to use them. How could he forget the martial arts he was trained by the Queen of the Country of Shadows, Skaha? Even now, Wuming's body still trembled slightly when he recalled the experience of being trained by Skaha. It could only be said that not being a human played a big role. If he was an ordinary person, he would probably die in the middle of the training. Although Wuming persevered, the hardships he went through were not enough to let others know. Cough cough. Wuming took advantage of the fact that Gorgon could not stop him and sped up. Because he maintained his human form, Wuming was quite small compared to Gorgon. The closer he got to Gorgon by Wuming, the greater the contrast between him and Gorgon. Probably a little panicked because he could not stop Wuming from advancing too quickly, Gorgon made a strange sound again. This time, the sound was full of unwillingness. However, Wuming did not care whether Gorgon was willing or not. Even if Wuming's eyes were fixed on Gorgon's eyes, because Gorgon's eyes were already in a lifeless state, Wuming could not see anything. As for why Wuming paid attention to Gorgon's eyes, it was because Wuming wanted to attack Gorgon's eyes. After all, no matter the reason, it was true that Gorgon could not heal himself at the moment. Whether it was Gorgon's tail or Gorgon's snake hair, they all proved this. Therefore, Wuming planned to destroy Gorgon's demonic eyes of petrification first before thinking about other things. If Gorgon lost the demonic eyes of petrification, it could be said that Gorgon was a tiger without its teeth and claws. At best, it would only be a slightly bigger monster. There was nothing to be afraid of. Of course, the premise was that Gorgon had no other abilities after being assimilated by Tiamat's authority. However, Wuming did not know what exactly happened to Gorgon, nor did he know if the current Gorgon had any other abilities that Wuming did not know of. After all, the conclusion that Gorgon has been assimilated by Tiamat's authority was only Wuming's guess, although it was very likely to be the case. However, a guess was just a guess. It could only be used as backup information. Wuming lacked accurate information. Therefore, Wuming was taking a gamble. Or rather, he could only take a gamble. Bzzz, Wuming, who was getting closer and closer to Gorgon, held the Sword of Salvation that was emitting a trace of electric light. That was the sign that the Sword of Salvation was accumulating the Thunder of Salvation. In the world of the deicide, the Sword of Salvation was a weapon specially created by the gods for Rama to slay the Demon King. Not only was it the materialization of the Manchala formation that stored the gods' weapons, but it was also the embodiment of the weapon that slayed the Demon King in Rama's story, the indestructible blade. Because Rama, as a hero, was the existence that dealt with the Demon King, and Rama himself had the legend of slaying the Demon King, Rabona, the Thunder of Salvation that filled the Sword of Salvation was also a special attack against demons. Whether it was the Demon King or monster, as long as there was demon in it, it would be included in the special attack range of the Thunder of Salvation. Gorgon's petrification ray undoubtedly had demon in it. The reason why it could easily split apart Gorgon's petrification ray was because of this special effect. This point was very similar to Rama's weapon, the indestructible blade. His weapon also had a special effect against demon. It could only be said that no matter which world Rama was from, there was indeed a similarity. And Wuming was going to use this Thunder of Salvation against the demonic nature to destroy Gorgon's demonic eye and make it half crippled. Looking at Gorgon's head that was only a few dozen meters away, Wuming suddenly jumped away from the snake hair that served as a runway to approach Gorgon. The distance of only a few dozen meters was a very close distance for Wuming, or for any servant, so Wuming directly jumped up and no longer used the snake hair as a runway to approach Gorgon. The snake hair that was used as a runway by Wuming directly exploded the moment Wuming jumped up. It was as if it was kicked by the powerful energy generated by Wuming's kick. This was enough to show how powerful Wuming was. Wuming, who was flying in the air, looked like he had lost his footing. This made the snake hair in the distance close in, ready to directly bite Wuming to death. However, Enkidu once again showed his power. Countless heavenly locks shot out from Wuming's body and pierced the snake heads on the snake hair. Not only did it prevent the snake hair from interfering with Wuming's actions, but it also allowed Wuming to take one step closer. The heavenly locks that wrapped around Wuming's body were like a swing. Along with the many snake heads that pierced into Wuming's body, the heavenly locks directly swung Wuming away. Coupled with the force of Wuming's jump, and the support from Wuming's telekinesis, this scene appeared on the scene. Wuming, who was still a few dozen meters away from Gorgon, used less than 0.01 seconds to arrive in front of Gorgon's head. To be more precise, he arrived in front of Gorgon's magic eyes of petrification. At that moment, Wuming also stabbed the Sword of Salvation into Gorgon's eyes and released the Thunder of Salvation that gathered on the Sword of Salvation. Explode! Sword of Salvation. Translator, WQL Editor, Alim. After accumulating for a long time, the Thunder of Salvation broke out in an unprecedented way. The moment it broke out, even Wuming was temporarily blinded. Besides the vast expanse of whiteness in front of Wuming, there was nothing else. It was almost a form of self-suggestion. When a person closed their eyes, their remaining senses, their ears, would become very useful. This was why students who liked to catch up on sleep between classes found the sound to be particularly loud. At this moment, Wuming's ears were filled with the deafening sound of thunder and the miserable cries of Gorgon. In the air, Wuming could even feel the strong wind caused by Gorgon shaking violently due to the pain. Listening to this mournful cry, Wuming inexplicably felt a trace of pity. However, now was not the time to think about this. Enkidu. Wuming, who had temporarily lost his vision, immediately shouted out Enkidu's name. Clatter. The sound of chains, accompanied by the sound of thunder and the miserable cries of Gorgon, filled Wuming's ears. At the same time, Wuming also felt the heaven lock firmly wrapped around his body. At the next moment, a different map appeared in Wuming's mind after activating his telekinesis. At the same time, Wuming, who had activated his telekinesis, also projected Gorgon's current situation into his mind. At this moment, Gorgon spread out its hands, its broken hair fluttering in the wind. It raised its head and roared at the sky. This extremely miserable scene appeared in Wuming's mind. Forcibly suppressing the inexplicable pity in his heart, Wuming looked at a certain direction on the ground and instantly threw Enkidu down. The end of the heaven lock was wrapped around Wuming's body. When Wuming threw the wedge of the heaven lock to the ground, Enkidu would bring Wuming away from Gorgon. Although Wuming, who was temporarily blinded, could still see, for the sake of safety, Wuming still wanted to get away from Gorgon first. It was inevitable that the other party had other abilities that Wuming did not know about. As expected, when Wuming felt that he was being dragged to the ground by Enkidu, something new happened to Gorgon. Chapter 968. Ah! A shrill female voice came out of Gorgon's mouth, a roar filled with hatred that would make anyone who heard it tremble in fear. Not only that, Gorgon's voice no longer sounded like a singing voice, it sounded more like the voice of Gorgon's own consciousness. The maternal aura of Gorgon had completely disappeared, and the aura of hatred that belonged to the Avenger filled Gorgon once again. All of this proved that Gorgon had turned back into Gorgon. Kingu. Where are you? Kingu. Ah! My eyes. My eyes. Kingu. Where are you? Come back to me. Gorgon let out a terrifying roar as he covered his eyes that were bleeding purple blood with both hands. Not only that, but Gorgon's snake hair and injured tail that had been cut off by Wuming were also recovering at a slow but visible speed. It can heal itself. Wuming was confused. Could it be that Gorgon was not completely assimilated by Tiamat's authority? Could it be that it was only the surface that was assimilated, and it would heal if it was seriously injured? Just as Wuming was puzzled, a large amount of black semi-liquid suddenly emerged from Gorgon's wounds that had not fully recovered. It was the origin black soil. Wuming could feel the power of the origin black soil contained within it. The origin black soil reacted with the wounds caused by Wuming's blade of salvation, further increasing Gorgon's pain. His roar gradually became louder than that of a magical beast. Could it be that the reason why Gorgon was assimilated by Tiamat's authority was because of the origin black soil? Just as Wuming was thinking, Enkidu had already pulled Wuming to the ground. Wuming didn't need to use any force. He easily stood on the ground, stirring up a cloud of sand. What the hell is going on? Looking at Gorgon, who was some distance away from him, Wuming was not in a hurry to make his next move. Instead, he fell into deep thought. Gorgon, who seemed to have been assimilated by Tiamat, did not have the slightest trace of the black origin mud in his body and was unable to heal himself. However, Gorgon, who had been severely injured, broke away from Tiamat's assimilation and leaked the black origin mud from his body. Furthermore, Gorgon's self-healing ability had also returned. Most importantly, who was the Kingu that Gorgon mentioned? In the legends, the son and companion of Tiamat, the god who led 11 magical beasts against the gods but was killed. This was the story of Kingu in myths, and Wuming knew this as well. However, there was no such thing as Kingu in this singularity, right? Wait a minute. Wuming suddenly thought of something. Could it be that the guy who used Enkidu's body was Kingu? However, Wuming was once again puzzled. If it was really Kingu who used Enkidu's body, it was impossible for him to be affected by Enkidu's body. Whether it was the reaction of the fake Enkidu when Wuming left last time, or the reaction of the fake Enkidu when he left just now, it meant that the fake Enkidu was affected by the reaction of Enkidu's body to Wuming and the real Enkidu. If it was a god of the same generation as deity N, how could Kingu be affected by the residual memory of less than 100 years? If it was really Kingu, it would definitely not be affected by Enkidu's body, and it would definitely completely crush the residual memory of Enkidu's body. The Kingu that Gorgon mentioned could only be the fake Enkidu who used Enkidu's body. Other than him, there shouldn't be anyone else on the magical beast side, right? Or was the real Kingu hiding in the dark? As expected, I still have to find him and ask him clearly. Wuming was naturally referring to the fake Enkidu. However, before the first wave of trouble subsided, Ishtar used the connection she established with Wuming to ask for help from Wuming. Hyunryong, this is a big crisis. I'm going to die. Hurry up and give me mana. Ishtar's impolite words were transmitted into Wuming's mind. This gave Wuming a fright. Wuming immediately checked Ishtar's mana, but it was completely empty. Not only that, Ishtar was constantly being attacked, and her spiritual base was slowly being damaged. Could it be that she encountered a magical beast commander? That was most likely the case. After thinking about it carefully, it was possible to arrange a magical beast commander in the Persian Gulf, such as the one that was based on the mass-produced magical beast Kururu. It was probably that the magical beast commander was hiding underwater, waiting for Ishtar to exhaust her mana after dealing with other mass-produced magical beasts before attacking Ishtar. This caused Ishtar to be unable to fight back. But, remember to be more polite next time. With this sentence, the last arrow-shaped mana crystal on the back of Wuming's right hand disappeared, and Ishtar, who was in the Persian Gulf, was instantly filled with mana. Understood. Ishtar replied to Wuming through the connection between the contract, and then began to counterattack. At this point, the 3 mana crystals prepared for Ishtar were exhausted. When Wuming transferred mana to Ishtar, Gorgon became more extreme. Kingu. My son. Come to my side. Kingu. Did you betray me? His rationality was gradually suppressed by pain and anger. Magical beasts. My sons. Your mother needs you. As if connected by blood, Gorgon's roar could only be heard a few kilometers away, but the mass-produced magical beasts in the Mesopotamia seemed to have heard Gorgon's words. Their eyes turned completely scarlet, and their bodies grew several times in an instant. Whether it was speed or strength, they had an unprecedented increase. It was as if they had entered a berserk mode. The soldiers at the front line of the north wall were caught off guard by these enhanced magical beasts. For a moment, the soldiers' routine tactics to deal with the magical beasts were broken. Several magical beasts rushed to the iron gate under the north wall and launched an attack. Even the gate was broken. The north wall was in great danger. The magical beast commander's strength was also enhanced. Ishtar, who was originally supported by Wuming's mana, regained her advantage and blocked the attacks of the mermaid Kururu and the mermaid Kururu. However, for some reason, the magical beasts of Kururu were suddenly enhanced, and this caught Ishtar off guard. This, what the hell is going on? Ishtar cried as she helplessly retreated. If she did not retreat, she would be surrounded by the magical beasts in the Persian Gulf today. The Persian Gulf was in great danger. Chapter 969. The same great danger also existed in the territory of the feathered serpent god. In the southern jungle, Uxiu Mughar, who was fighting the feathered serpent god, was about to retreat. The mass-produced Uxiu Mughar he brought with him had basically been wiped out by another group of humans who had rushed over to provide support. But at this moment, just like the other magical beast commanders, Uxiu Mughar also sensed the call of the mother goddess. Uxiu Mughar also entered a temporary berserk mode. This time, Uxiu Mughar, who originally wanted to retreat temporarily, did not retreat anymore. He charged directly at the leopard man and quizzed. For a moment, Uxiu Mughar, who was much faster than before, did not allow the leopard man to react in time. Half of her body was torn apart by Uxie-Mughar's claws, and she was sent flying by the inertia caused by Uxie-Mughar's attack. Leopard Man. Quizzard was shocked. Why did this Uxie-Mughar suddenly go berserk? But now, Quizzard did not have time to think, because Uxie-Mughar charged at her with extreme speed and used his huge claws to press down on Quizzard. Great danger. Gadotsi and the others, who had been asked by the Leopard Man and Quizzard to be in charge of eliminating the mass-produced Uxie-Mughar, were not in a good situation either. Gadotsi and the others had joined the Feathered Serpent Gods group and were gradually wiping out the mass-produced Uxie-Mughar. They were even prepared to help deal with the commander Uxie-Mughar. But because of Gorgon, although the number of mass-produced Uxie-Mugals had been reduced to a certain extent, each mass-produced Uxie-Mugals had become more powerful. Originally, Mashu could deal with 2 or 3 mass-produced Uxie-Mugals, but now, it was difficult for Mashu to deal with 1 mass-produced Uxie-Mugals. At the same time, Merlin was half kneeling on the ground for some reason and vomiting blood. Gadotsi and the others were also panicking because of Merlin's sudden change. Nay. Merlin? What's wrong with you? Gadotsi was escorted to Merlin's side by Matthew, and she asked with concern. Merlin shifted his posture and leaned against a rock beside him in a slumped posture. However, Merlin still acted as if he was about to die. Something happened to Tiamat's seal, but it doesn't matter. The seal hasn't been completely broken, and I can still hold on. Cough cough. Merlin said something that Gadotsi couldn't understand while coughing up more blood. Mr. Merlin, are you sure there's no problem? Once again, Mashu struggled to kick away an attacking Uxie-Mughar. She could not help but turn to look at Merlin. Merlin's current situation was really worrying. The amount of blood he vomited should be enough for him to leave the stage, right? Ahaha, it's okay, it's okay. After all, I'm not a human. It's normal for me to vomit more blood than a human. At this point, Merlin still smiled humorously. After that, the sound of chains came from beside everyone. Since Merlin said so, then he must be fine. She beheaded 1 or 2 Uxie-Mughar that wanted to sneak up on her with her scythe. She dodged the sputtering purple blood from the demonic beast's wounds and jumped to Gadotsi and the other's side. The sound of chains came from the chains on Anna's scythe. Ahaha, Anna, you're still as sharp-tongued as ever. Show some concern for me, Merlin laughed. I'm just telling the truth. Although Anna really wanted to kill Merlin, there was no doubt that Merlin had the highest tacit understanding with Anna. Since Merlin said so, then he was not forcing himself. He must be fine, at least he would not leave the stage. After Anna finished speaking, she looked in the direction of the north wall and then left to kill other mass-produced demonic beasts. Even if the demonic beasts were strengthened, they would still die as long as their heads were cut off. This was the disadvantage of demonic beasts as beasts. By the way, Senior, should we let Mr. Merlin retreat? Looking at Merlin's condition, if no one was watching, a demonic beast might come and take him away. Matthew was really worried. Don't worry, don't worry. Although I'm a little weak now, I still have means to protect myself. Anna will kill the other mass-produced demonic beasts. You guys go and support Quizzard. Don't worry about me. But, however, when Matthew was about to say something, Gadotsi interrupted Matthew. Let's go, Matthew. We have to believe in Merlin. This was a very important point that Gadotsi had learned along the way, to believe in one's companions. That's right, that's right. I don't want to die meaninglessly. After all, I still have an important mission. Merlin's eyes flashed with a rare trace of seriousness. Yes, I know, Senior. Mr. Merlin too. Take care. Then, Gadotsi and Matthew left Merlin to support Quizzard. After all, before the demonic beasts were inexplicably strengthened again, they had been reduced to a considerable number by everyone. Therefore, there were not many mass-produced Uxie-Mugals. In addition, Anna was constantly cleaning up, so there were basically no mass-produced Uxie-Mugals. However, the so-called fish that slipped through the net still existed. A few Uxiumugals somehow came behind Merlin, who was sitting on the ground. They were silent, like wild beasts about to capture their prey. One of the mass-produced Uxiumugals seemed to want to be the first beast to eat the crab. It was one step faster than the other mass-produced demonic beasts and slowly approached Merlin, while the other demonic beasts were in a state of observation. The demonic beasts could sense that the existence in front of them had a lot of magic power and was probably not to be trifled with. Therefore, when faced with such an enemy, one of the demonic beasts would often take the lead to test the waters. When this mass-produced Uxiumugals was almost close to Merlin, Merlin was still in a state of not noticing anything unusual. In the end, this Uxiumugals suddenly jumped up and pounced directly at Merlin's neck. It looked like it wanted to bite off Merlin's neck in one breath. However, before this mass-produced Uxiumugals could land in the air, a bright holy sword pierced through its head, and it died instantly. This posed a threat to the remaining demonic beasts who wanted to attack Merlin. They were so scared that they scrambled in other directions. However, Merlin would not leave a passerby who might be attacked by these escaping demonic beasts in the lurch. Merlin raised his staff and gently tapped the ground. Several beams as thick as light cannons were fired at the demonic beasts who had not yet run far. The last wails of the demonic beasts reached Merlin's ears. There was no doubt that they had hit. I really am a magician. Chapter 970. These were the words of a court magician whose swordsmanship was better than King Arthur's. Following that, Merlin threw the fake Excalibur in his other hand far away, along with the magic beast carcass on the fake sacred sword, far away from Merlin. Phew. Fortunately, the seal was not completely broken. Really, did Gorgon come directly to the north wall to fight with the Villo? After muttering a few words, Merlin closed his eyes and sneaked into the dream to begin the repair of Tiamat's seal. While the various lines of defense in Mesopotamia were in crisis, Wuming also faced a new situation. Although Wuming was very worried about the North Wall, the jungle, and the Persian Gulf, he had to deal with the matter at hand. After Gorgon roared at the sky like a madman, a giant dark green snake appeared in front of Wuming. However, there were traces of slight corrosion on the ground leading to the North Wall. It seemed that this poisonous snake came from the North Wall. So that's how it is, the monster commander hiding in the dark is responsible for attacking the North Wall. Wuming instantly understood why this giant monster appeared here. It was probably summoned by Gorgon and rushed here from the front line to support Gorgon. Roar! The giant dark green snake roared at Wuming. Not only that, but when the other party roared, an outrageous amount of purple saliva fell to the ground, instantly causing an extremely violent corrosion reaction on the bare ground. Obviously, its mouth contained a shocking amount of venom. With this alone, Wuming recognized the identity of the other party. The big poisonous snake Basumu. Although it was said to be a poisonous snake, it looked more like a dragon. Especially at the back of its head, there was a pair of soft horns full of barbs. Moreover, its entire head looked incomparably hard, as if it was wearing a helmet. Its two pairs of four large eyes were emitting a red light, looking quite horrifying. However, although it was a dragon, Basumu only had a pair of forelimbs. In addition, there was a long tail. Countless dark green scales were attached to the long tail like armor. There was also an unusually sturdy breastplate above the forelimbs. Not only that, but both sides of Basumu's body, spine, and tail were also full of spikes, especially the spikes on the tail. Not only that, these spikes were also shining with dark green light and looked full of venom, but the degree of venom was not as strong as the venom in Basumu's mouth. Wuming judged this because of the degree of corrosion of the road leading to the North Wall. This guy is a bit difficult to deal with. Wuming saw Basumu's uniqueness at a glance. First of all, Wuming had never encountered any mass-produced versions of Basumu. It was obvious that this was the only prototype of Basumu. This also meant that this Ba-Shumu's specialized Ba-Shumu was the first and only one. Secondly, this Basumu's body was covered with an unusually sturdy armor that could be seen with the naked eye. It was obvious that this was added by someone at a later stage. In other words, this Basumu's body was quite fragile and needed a sturdy armor. This was completely different from the other magical beast commanders. The other magical beast commanders had extremely tough bodies. Ulidim could withstand Wuming's multiple spells without dying. Ulidim was also completely killed by Ereshkigal's attack several times. Basumu, on the other hand, gave people the feeling that his body was extremely fragile. However, sacrificing his physical strength also meant that Basumu must have strengths in other aspects. For example, Basumu's venom. Regardless of the time, place, or even the world, poison was something that people feared and avoided. Although its scale was not as big as a natural disaster, its degree of terror was no less than a natural disaster. Whether in mythology or history, there were many heroes who were killed by poison. The most typical example was the teacher of the Greek heroes that Wuming met in the Holy Grail War of the 14 Horsemen and the American Singularity, the Greek god Charon, who was of the same generation as Zeus. Charon, who was poisoned to death by the venom of the viper Hydra, could be said to be the most typical example. Since there were heroes who were poisoned to death, there were also many poison experts. The most typical example was Semiramis, who had poisoned Mordred half to death in the Holy Grail War of the 14 Horsemen. She was evaluated in history as the oldest poison killer. After becoming a heroic spirit, Semiramis' poison was undoubtedly fatal to her servants. Semiramis' control of poison had almost reached the peak. At that time, when Wuming intervened in the Holy Grail War between the black and red sides, most of the masters of the red side were poisoned by Semiramis. They were controlled under the condition that they did not die. From this, it could be seen how powerful Semiramis' control of poison was. Moreover, not only was she a poison expert, it was said that in her hanging garden of Babylon, there was a big venomous snake. That's right, it was one of the 11 sons of Tiamat in front of Wuming, the big venomous snake, Basumu. Wuming didn't know where Basumu and Semiramis' hanging garden of Babylon came from, but after all, Semiramis was the queen of Assyria in the Mesopotamia region, so it was not surprising that Basumu existed in her hanging garden of Babylon. Basumu, who existed in the hanging garden of Babylon, could be said to be Semiramis' ghost card. If there was no accident, when she used this ghost card on the enemy would undoubtedly die, whether it was a servant or a human. Of course, there was an exception to the existence of special abilities. In short, the Basumu in front of him was powerful. In Wuming's view, even if all the other demonic beast commanders were added together, they would not be able to defeat Basumu. If you want to ask why, for example, now. Basumu opened his mouth in the direction of Wuming, and countless purple liquids spurted out. It was like a flash flood, like a tsunami, sweeping over Wuming. The speed was so fast that Wuming almost couldn't react. Wuming, who was frowning, instantly jumped up and flew into the air. He even smelled a trace of poison. It was reasonable to say that even if it was a servant, after smelling such a trace of poison, there would be severe adverse reactions. But unfortunately, Wuming was immune to negative effects such as poison. This was all due to the effect of the dragon body. Wuming, who cheated every day, naturally made this spiritual base according to his body. Therefore, Wuming's spiritual base should also be immune to poison. However, the spiritual base was a spiritual base after all, not the body. The spiritual base was definitely much weaker than the body, so Wuming would definitely be affected by negative effects. Just like if Wuming was hit by Gorgon's petrification ray, he would definitely enter a slow petrification state. Therefore, Wuming avoided the petrification ray. Wuming's current spiritual base was equivalent to having a great resistance to negative effects. Chapter 971. Wuming wasn't afraid of the trace of poisonous gas produced by Basumu's poison. Even if he inhaled the poisonous gas into his body, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, the immunity effect would have some effect. But if it was a sea of poison on the scale of a flood, it would be a different story. Moreover, looking at the poisonous liquid that was rapidly spreading on the ground below like a flood, Wuming inexplicably felt a trace of disgust. This made Wuming feel that it would be better for him to fly into the sky. Let's not talk about other things first, this poisonous liquid looked really disgusting. After all, it was spat out by Basumu's mouth. This made Wuming directly reject the plan of using the heaven lock to deal with Basumu. Even if Enkidu wasn't afraid of poison, he didn't want Enkidu to be stained with this stuff. He guessed that Enkidu wouldn't want to either. The venom spread all over the ground, and even Gorgon was caught in it. But for some reason, Gorgon wasn't affected by the poisonous liquid. Was it because he was the goddess of magical beasts, or was he affected by the black mud? Looking at Gorgon, whose wounds had completely healed, Wuming couldn't help but think so. The black mud gushing out of Gorgon's wounds had also stopped, but the black mud didn't spread. It just wrapped around Gorgon's body. That was why Wuming guessed that it was because of the black mud that Gorgon wasn't affected by the poisonous liquid. Then Wuming flew directly to Gorgon. Due to the recovery of his self-healing ability, Gorgon's magic eye that was originally destroyed by Wuming was now slowly recovering. The magic eye was a big killer for Gorgon, but it was also a very troublesome existence for Wuming, so Wuming couldn't wait for Gorgon's magic eye to recover. The so-called, take advantage of someone's illness, was the current situation. Gorgon's demon eye had yet to recover, and the snake hair alone was not enough to stop Wuming's advance. Therefore, Gorgon could be said to be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered by Wuming. However, Ba Xiumu would not let Wuming kill Gorgon. Ba Xiumu was like a loach, slipping through the sea of venom it spewed out. In an instant, he arrived in front of Wuming, blocking his path. Roar! Following Ba Xiumu's roar, countless amounts of venom were sprayed out by Ba Xiumu, which made Wuming instantly retreat far away. You're really annoying. Wuming, who had retreated to a distance and cursed, raised the divine blade of salvation. Holy light gathered on the divine blade of salvation, gradually illuminating the surroundings like a flash bomb. Divine blade of salvation, show the light of salvation and bring peace to the world. With the infusion of magic power from Wuming, the venom was illuminated by the light of the divine blade of salvation. In the next second, the venom began to gradually dissipate as if it had met its natural enemy. It did not turn into gas, but directly disappeared. As the name suggested, the light of salvation that came with the divine blade of salvation had a strong effect on these filthy things. Not only did the divine blade of salvation have an effect on the venom, but it also reacted to Ba Xiumu, who released it. Roar! Ba Xiumu let out a blood-curdling scream, as if a vampire was directly exposed to the sun. His whole body emitted purple smoke. Ah! Gorgon seemed to be slightly affected as well. A trace of the power of the divine blade of salvation reacted to the black mud on Gorgon's body, causing Gorgon great pain. My son! My Ba Xiumu! Destroy him! Gorgon roared as if he had gone mad. He felt even more abnormal than before. However, Ba Xiumu could not take care of himself at this moment. Like a loach, he rolled around in the gradually disappearing sea of venom. But in the next second, as if it had reached its limit, the black mud on Gorgon's body began to spread. At this moment, Gorgon was like a fountain of black mud gushing out endlessly. A large amount of black mud covered the venom on the ground, and Ba Xiumu was also covered by the black mud. Not good. Wuming could not help but be shocked. He knew better than anyone what would happen to an existence eroded by the black mud. Every existence eroded by the black mud would become hostile to Wuming, and their strength would greatly increase. Sure enough, Ba Xiumu, who was no longer rolling around after being covered by the black mud, slowly stood up. His originally dark green body had turned into a black snake, and his forelimbs had disappeared for some reason. It could be said that he had turned into a snake in the truest sense. Gorgon, who had become the fountain of the black mud, was now completely covered by the black mud. She abandoned Wuming and walked towards the north wall, which surprised Wuming. If Gorgon went to the north wall, then the people in the north wall would definitely be finished. Even if they had servants, it would be useless. Gorgon, who had obtained Tiamat's authority, could not be dealt with by the number of servants. Now that he was covered by the black mud, it was really a big crisis. Wuming subconsciously wanted to stop Gorgon, but someone stopped him first. Hiss! Ba Xiumu, who had turned into a black snake, appeared in front of Wuming. He made a strange roar and directly opened his mouth to bite Wuming. In an instant, Wuming was swallowed by Ba Xiumu. However, a few seconds later, a light appeared on Ba Xiumu's stomach. The next second, the light exploded and Wuming flew out from it. Because of the light of salvation, Wuming was not contaminated with the poison. No, it should be said that he was not contaminated with the black mud. Ba Xiumu, who had been eroded by the black mud, had turned into black mud. His mouth and stomach were full of black mud, but it was also full of poison. This guy's speed has become a lot faster. If Wuming could still look down on Ba Xiumu before, now that Wuming was facing Ba Xiumu who had been eroded by the black mud, he could no longer do so. The previous Ba Xiumu was only poisonous, but now Ba Xiumu was not only poisonous and had the black mud, but his physical fitness was also much stronger than the other monster commanders Wuming had seen. Looking in the direction of Gorgon, Wuming found that there was a big hole in the direction Gorgon was going, and Gorgon was long gone. It seemed that Gorgon had drilled into the ground through this hole. However, Gorgon's destination would not change. It was definitely going to the north wall. However, Wuming could not leave now. As for why, Wuming split Ba Xiumu, who was rushing over, with his sword, and frowned more and more. It was a fact that he could not leave, but he could not let this guy go. The current Gorgon was dangerous, but the current Ba Xiumu was even more dangerous. Its poison and black mud were much more dangerous than Gorgon. Wuming held the blade of salvation horizontally in his hand, and his face became firm. He had to get rid of this guy here. Chapter 972. Roar. Wuming swung the blade of salvation and rushed towards Ba Xiumu. The blade of salvation with the black root soil was a lethal weapon for Ba Xiumu at this moment. Hiss. Ba Xiumu wasn't afraid of Wuming either. He let out a strange roar and also charged at Wuming. Ba Xiumu quickly swung his body, which had become more agile after losing his forelimbs, in an attempt to distract Wuming so that Wuming could not determine from which side he would attack from. However, Wuming did not pay attention to Ba Xiumu's head at all. He stared closely at a certain part of Ba Xiumu's body, the so-called 7 inches part. Wuming did not know if the so-called 7 inches was Ba Xiumu's weakness, but Wuming had seen before that Ba Xiumu's body was covered by an extremely thick breastplate from the head down to the chest. Defense naturally existed in the strongest part, but it was often the weakest part. It was precisely because it was weak that it needed the strongest defense. Just like how Godatsi, as a master, was extremely weak, so she needed Matthew's protection. It was the same principle. Therefore, Wuming guessed that the part of Ba Xiumu's chest that was covered with armor was its weakness. Ba Xiumu and Wuming did not slow down at all. At the moment when they were about to meet, Ba Xiumu launched an attack from Wuming's left side by constantly swaying, opening his poisonous mouth to bite Wuming. Looking at the huge poisonous needle in Ba Xiumu's mouth, if this bite hit, Wuming was afraid that he would directly leave. However, Wuming turned a deaf ear to this poisonous mouth and stared straight at Ba Xiumu's chest. I am the strongest and the one who holds all victory in my hands. No matter if it is a human or a demon, I will defeat any enemy that stands in my way. Giant with supreme power, give me your aid. Wuming's words left his mouth. In an instant, just as Ba Xiumu's fangs were about to touch Wuming's skin, a golden substance appeared on Wuming's body and blocked Ba Xiumu's attack. That was the byproduct of the giant incarnation. It was the substance that could form a golden giant around Wuming. Then, Wuming chanted the spirit of words. All evildoers, be afraid of my power. Now, I will obtain the majesty of 10 mountains, the strength of 100 rivers, and the strength of 1,000 dragons. What the majestic me brings is the mark of the dragon seed that calls for victory. After the incantation, the golden substance instantly condensed and attached itself to Wuming in the form of a dragonoid. It then grabbed Basumu in its hand. This was the effect of the dragon seed incarnation on the giant incarnation. Ba Xiumu, who had never seen such a scene, was shocked. He tried to break free from the dragonoid's hand, but to no avail. That was to be expected. The giant incarnation had unparalleled strength, while the dragon seed incarnation had the attribute of a dragon. In terms of strength, Ba Xiumu was inferior to the giant incarnation. In terms of attribute, Ba Xiumu also had the attribute of a dragon. No matter what, it would be defeated. For a moment, Ba Xiumu was at his wit's end. However, Ba Xiumu's strongest point had always been his poison. Sizzle, the dragonoid's hand that grabbed Ba Xiumu began to dissolve because of the poison on Ba Xiumu's body. But Wuming didn't have the slightest knowledge of this. Wuming raised the divine blade of salvation, and an identical divine blade of salvation appeared in the giant dragonoid's hand. However, the divine blade of salvation was made of pure energy just like the dragonoid. However, this divine blade of salvation in the form of energy also had the power of the divine blade of salvation in Wuming's hand. Divine blade of salvation, burst forth with the thunder of salvation, help me eliminate the world's suffering. Along with Wuming's words, the dragonoid raised the divine blade of salvation in its hand. Kacha! Suddenly, a thunder from the cloudless sky suddenly fell on the divine blade of salvation, and the entire divine blade of salvation made of energy instantly became real. It felt like a real divine blade of salvation. The whole Mesopotamia seemed to have heard the thunder. Whether it was demonic beasts, humans, or servants, they couldn't help but look up at the sky. But then they returned to the matter in front of them, which was fighting. On Wuming's side, Ba Xiumu, who was tightly held in the dragonoid's hand, showed fear. He was already struggling, but now he was struggling even more fiercely as if his body was about to break. Kacha! Another thunder, but the sound was not as loud as before. Splat! Ba Xiumu, who had been cut in half, kept flopping on the ground like a dehydrated fish. The broken part was the part below the head and above the chest, which was the so-called 7 inches. This caused Ba Xiumu, who had been cut in half, to look like his tail was several times longer than his head. Ba Xiumu did not break in half by himself, but by the divine blade of salvation. The second thunder came from the divine blade of salvation, which was what Ba Xiumu wanted. He successfully escaped from the dragonoid's hand. However, Ba Xiumu, who had escaped from the dragonoid's hand and fell to the ground, slowly stopped flopping. It seemed like Wuming's guess was right. That was Ba Xiumu's weakness. Enemies eroded by the black origin mud would indeed pose a threat to Wuming, but not every enemy was as powerful as Gidia. Even if Ba Xiumu was strengthened by the black origin mud, he was still no match for Wuming after Wuming attacked his weakness. However, as the saying goes, cut the grass and dig up the roots. Who knew if Ba Xiumu was faking it? It would be bad if Ba Xiumu bit Wuming when he let his guard down or left Wuming. After all, snakes were also creatures that knew how to deceive. The dragonoid raised the divine blade of salvation again, but this time it was not the thunder of salvation, but the light of salvation. Huff! A flame appeared at the tip of the divine blade of salvation. The flame gradually grew bigger, and slowly became an existence comparable to the sun. Wuming had used this sun many times. This was another way to use the light of salvation. The original illumination of all things was only a low-level light of salvation. When it turned into a flame, it was the true manifestation of the light of salvation. It was a light that was enough to kill Ba Xiumu. Hiss! Ba Xiumu let out a strange roar again, but this time, his voice was filled with the fear of death. Purify the filth, light of salvation. As Wuming whispered softly, the sun, on the divine blade of salvation was like a fountain of flames. It continued to radiate flames to the surroundings, enveloping Ba Xiumu, the black origin mud on his body, and the poison that was mixed with the black origin mud in the surroundings. The black origin mud and the poison were all destroyed by the light of salvation, which contained the power of the origin. Ba Xiumu, on the other hand, died completely in the sound of burning flames. Chapter 973. While Wuming was killing Batshimu, the beasts in the north wall were resting. The reason was that the commanders of the beasts were fighting near the north wall. Behind a relatively hidden mound, a gigantic seven-headed serpent was fighting with a white-clothed green-haired man. The two were precisely Muzamaf and the fake that had taken over Enkidu's body. However, he couldn't be called the fake Enkidu, so he decided to call him Jingu for now. As a huge seven-headed snake, Musu Mafu didn't rush up to fight with Jingu. Instead, he fought with Jingu like a kite, as if he didn't want to launch a severe attack on Jingu, but also didn't want Jingu to leave. Kingu had a tangled expression on his face. As the son of the Warcraft goddess, Jingu had heard Gorgon's roar just now. Although Jingu was helpless to be regarded as a traitor by Gorgon, it could not be helped. He did not say it in front of that person, otherwise his brain would be affected. There was another thing that made Kingu feel helpless. The other commanders really treated him as a traitor. He wasn't a traitor. Even if he was, he couldn't fight with Muzamaf, who was also a commander. Fortunately, Muzamaf didn't have the intention to fight. Muzamaf, I know you are afraid of me. You don't have to be like this. I don't have the intention to betray Mother. Muzamaf was known to be a two-faced fence-sitter among the demon commanders. In the beginning, because there were more humanoid demon commanders than beast-type demon commanders, Muzamaf had the intention to switch sides with the humanoid demon commanders. When he and Yukar fell into the underworld that was blasted open by Ishtar, he even used Yukar to send him to Ereshki Gal to his death, thus covering his escape from the underworld. After that, when he saw that the humanoid demon commanders had lost their advantage, he turned back to the beast-type demon commanders. Jingu himself wasn't interested in the division of magical beast commanders, but even he couldn't help but feel extreme disgust towards Muzamaf, who was two-faced and disobedient in public but opposed in private. In Kingu's view, this guy wasn't qualified to be his brother. After Gorgon issued an urgent command to the demons, Basumu, who was commanding the demons to attack the north wall with Muzamaf, rushed to Gorgon's side. Muzamaf, who had volunteered to stay behind, was given the order by Basumu to kill Jingu, who had betrayed their mother goddess. However, Muzamaf was a two-faced and cowardly commander. How could he fight Kingu to the death? This made Kingu look down on Muzamaf even more. I think you have felt it too. Basumu has just died. The reason why you are here is because you are afraid of being killed by that man. That man will come here soon. If you continue to waste time with me, you will be killed by that man in the end. The commanders of the beasts had telepathy. Kingu had felt it when Basumu was killed by Wuming. Kingu believed that Muzamaf must have felt it too, and Kingu was prepared to use this to scare Muzamaf away. However, the cowardly Muzamaf didn't show any signs of retreating even though his 7 heads showed a trace of fear. This was because he had also sensed that his mother goddess was rushing over. The fear on Muzamaf's 7 heads was only because he was afraid of the man Kingu had mentioned. He had stayed behind voluntarily because he was afraid of being killed by that man when he went to support his mother goddess. Sure enough, Basumu, who had gone to support his mother goddess, was killed. Although that man had already begun to rush over, the mother goddess was also rushing over. In fact, the mother goddess was 1 step ahead of that man. With the protection of the mother goddess, there was no need for him to be afraid. Kacha! A huge figure appeared from this huge rift valley. It was Gorgon, who had been corroded by the black mud. The originally pure white wings with a hint of gold had turned pitch black, and the purple snake hair had also turned dark purple. The originally pitch black scales had become even more filthy, as if they were full of curses. Finally, Gorgon's originally pure white skin was now shrouded in a black fog. Only his demonic eyes still shone with an ominous purple light. Being tainted by the black mud in the Rift Valley, Gorgon had become even crazier than an Avenger. Kingu! You betrayed me. Gorgon, whose mind was already somewhat abnormal, bent down with a ferocious expression. He looked at Kingu in front of him and roared furiously, filled with the desire for revenge. Mother, you were too anxious and made the wrong judgment. As the child of the goddess of magical beasts, I would never betray her. Kingu faced Gorgon's huge head without showing any signs of being misunderstood. There was only calmness and a smile on his face. Gorgon widened her purple demonic eyes and looked at Kingu crazily without saying a word. After a short while, Gorgon slowly raised her body, perhaps admitting that she had made the wrong judgment. In short, Gorgon didn't look for trouble with Kingu. Kingu smiled when he saw this and then flew to Gorgon's ear. Mother, the landing of Kururu in the Persian Gulf was very successful, and Uzu-Mughar is also entangled with Quizzard. Now we just need to break through the north wall and the humans will be in our pocket. Without responding to Kingu, Gorgon directly began to give orders. Magical beasts. Listen to my orders. The magical sound like a sound wave filled the minds of the magical beasts in the north wall. The magical beasts that were resting at the north wall all stood up. Destroy the humans. As soon as Gorgon's order came out, countless magical beasts rushed to the north wall. Musu Mafu also rushed to the north wall with the magical beasts. Chapter 974. It's really come to this. Despair filled their hearts. Seeing this, Leonidas silently made a judgment. However, they couldn't be blamed for this. Facing the gigantic serpent god Gorgon in the distance and facing so many magical beasts, even Leonidas, who had led 300 men to fight against tens of thousands of enemies, couldn't help but feel fear. If they were facing an army of humans, perhaps they wouldn't lose their fighting spirit. However, they were facing incomprehensible magical beasts. After all, magical beasts weren't humans. They were existences that couldn't be defeated in a one-on-one battle. In the face of magical beasts that outnumbered the soldiers by several times, it was natural that the soldiers would choose to give up and despair. However, even if everyone gave up, Leonidas wouldn't give up. People could fall into confusion and despair, but he couldn't. Because he was the epitome of history, the hero of human history. He was the undead spirit that led humans to the future. Since the people were in despair, then as a heroic spirit, he had to give them hope. Since they couldn't stop the magical beasts, then he would be the one to stop them. Leonidas had promised Wuming that he would defend the northern wall while Wuming wasn't around. Even if they had only met a few times, Leonidas wouldn't go back on his word. With that thought in mind, Leonida jumped off the north wall and landed in front of one of the portals. General Leonidas? Some of them shouted in fright, but most of them were already speechless. Ignoring the situation of the people on the northern wall, Leonidas looked straight ahead and silently watched the demons charging towards him. Step by step, he walked forward. At this moment, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid. At this moment, Leonidas was nervous and afraid, but more than that, he was excited from the bottom of his heart. This scene was much more magnificent than when he led 300 elites to fight against the Persian army. When he faced the Persian army, he was nervous, afraid, and other negative emotions. He was afraid that he would fail, and if he failed, his family and the people of Sparta would be ravaged by the Persian army. Leonidas was worried about everything. However, something happened. While Leonidas was nervous, it was his 300 friends who were watching. In the end, they helped Leonidas resolve the confusion in his heart. Therefore, even if he had become a heroic spirit and a servant, Leonidas didn't think that he was the one who stopped the Persian army at the hot spring gate. That was the shared glory of the 300 Spartans, including Leonidas. And this glory that belonged to the 300 Spartans had been sublimated into his noble phantasm. At some point, blue flames appeared behind Leonidas as he walked forward, and the number of flames was still increasing. That was the soul fire. Countless soul fires turned into human figures. They were all warriors with spears and shields. They were the 300 Spartan warriors. The blue flames were their soul fires. And Leonidas' noble phantasm was to summon the souls of the 300 Spartans to reenact the Battle of the Hot Spring Gate. When the demonic beasts were about to approach, Leonidas stopped and knocked the ground with his spear. "If you want to die, come and get it." The 300 Spartans repeated Leonidas' words and knocked the ground twice with their spears. "If you want to die, come and get it." He threw the soul spear in his hand at the attacking magical beast army and let out a furious roar. Ah! The spear pierced through countless magical beasts, but it was unable to stop the invasion of the magical beasts. To the tens of thousands of magical beasts, this amount of casualties was just a drop in the bucket. Many magical beasts continued to rush over. Although the 300 Spartans didn't have their spears, they still had their shields. The Spartans formed by the blue soul fire held their shields and ran in front of Leonidas, forming a rather thin shield barrier. However, their shields weren't the round shields in their hands, but their bodies. "Let's go, friends. Gather your souls here." When the 300 warriors formed a shield wall, Leonidas placed the spear in his right hand on the round shield in his left hand. Then, Leonidas slashed the round shield with the spear, and a flame suddenly ignited on the round shield. Leonidas then shouted the name of his relic. In an instant, countless flames appeared on Leonidas' round shield and spread all around, igniting the 300 warriors made of blue soul fire. In the next second, the 300 warriors made of blue soul fire instantly turned orange-red, and the warriors' figures gradually dissipated. Only the 300 shields emitting blazing hearts remained. Countless soul fires turned into red round shields, neatly arranged in the air, forming a shield formation, forming a true shield wall. The shields quickly moved to both sides, defending the entire north wall. The 300 shields became dots, and between the dots, there was an orange-red light film. The seemingly thin light film added an impenetrable layer of defense to the north wall. At this moment, countless demonic beasts had arrived in front of the north wall, or rather, the light film. They crashed into Leonidas's relic, using their teeth and claws, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't break through the defense of the shield wall. The people who saw this scene also recovered from their despair. They hadn't failed yet. With the help of the future heroes in human history, how could they fail? General Leonidas. The people guarding the north wall began to cheer for Leonidas, but at the same time, they didn't forget their duty. That was to guard the north wall as soldiers. One by one, the most powerful weapons for humans were activated, and the people were manually aiming at the demonic beast army, but they didn't dare to release the divine power seal. The soldiers were worried that releasing the divine power seal would destroy Leonidas's relic. Therefore, they could only watch in silence, clenching their fists, gritting their teeth, and blaming themselves for giving up just now. Leonidas, who turned back to look at this scene, smiled, because the soldiers had regained their fighting spirit. As long as the soldiers' despair and giving up were dispelled, Leonidas felt that this trip was worth it, even if he had to sacrifice himself in front of the demonic beasts. However, in the next moment, something unexpected happened. Chapter 975. Jina Wang Lu Tan's second scenery. Suddenly, the voice of a young female general entered Leonidas' ears. Dan no yura aso tobi. In an instant, a few silhouettes flashed past the demonic beasts outside of Leonidas' noble phantasm. After a few flashes of light, a large amount of demonic beasts' blood splattered all over the place. The purple blood gushed out like a fountain and splashed onto Leonidas' noble phantasm's light barrier. This is General Nuwakamaru. Leonida immediately recognized the owner of this technique and voice. It was the Tengu girl, Nuwakamaru. However, not only Nuwakamaru, but also Nuwakamaru's warrior monk, who had been following Nuwakamaru, also came here. Your Excellency Leonida, this humble monk and Master Nuwakamaru have begun to move freely under King Gilgamesh's orders. It seems like this humble monk and Master Nuwakamaru are not late. A man with many weapons on his back and Bicento in both hands, Musasobo Benkei, walked to Leonida's side from behind and stood upright with weapons in his hands. Oh, oh, oh. General Baiqing, you're here too. Leonidas was deeply moved. As a comrade who had fought alongside him, the meticulous Leonidas naturally sensed the fear of death in Takashi Kei's heart. He did not expect that Kei would be able to come to the front lines. If it was the Musasobo Benkei who didn't go through the beheading operation, no one would think that Musasobo Benkei was a coward. However, after surviving the beheading operation, Musasobo Benkei could be said to have changed into a different person, or it could be said that he no longer suppressed the fear in his heart. After that, everyone could see that Musasobo Benkei was afraid of the battlefield and demonic beasts. And of course, those who saw Musasobo Benkei's cowardice included Leonida. However, the cowardly Musasobo Benkei came to the front line with Nuwakamaru. How could Leonida not be surprised? This humble monk is just a coward who carries the name of Musasobo Benkei. Since this humble monk carries the name of Musasobo Benkei, this humble monk will fulfill the duty of Musasobo Benkei and follow Master Nuwakamaru at all times. Musasobo Benkei, or rather the Sea Lord who carried the name of Musasobo Benkei, said something that surprised Leonida's words. Leonida could tell that this soldier monk wasn't lying. He stared straight at Nuwakamaru who was flying up and down among the demonic beasts without the slightest hint of fear or cowardice. Ha ha ha. Looks like King Gilgamesh's decision to let you stay by General Nuwakamaru's side is quite effective. Leonida laughed heartily. As a hero who left his name in human history, the soldier monk standing next to Leonidas, regardless of whether it was Bian Qing of Musashi or Hai Zun of Changlu, as long as he was still a heroic spirit, he would definitely be able to overcome the fear in his heart. The only thing that would affect him was when he would wake up. Gilgamesh knew this very well, which was why he let Musasobo Benkei stay by Nuwakamaru's side. Nuwakamaru didn't disappoint and successfully pulled Musasobo Benkei back from the hell of cowardice. Ahem. General Leonida, we are still at war. Musasobo Benkei couldn't help but remind him. Leonida's laughter sounded like a party. Leonida's laughter wasn't soft. Not only did Musasobo Benkei hear it, but even Nuwakamaru who was fighting the demonic beasts outside the light barrier heard it. Hey! General Leonida, this isn't the time to laugh, right? How long can your noble phantasm last? Nuwakamaru who was jumping around and killing the demonic beasts, one of the Nuwakamaru who was closest to Leonida couldn't help but complain. Then, he quickly asked about the matter at hand. Nyo Ruowan, who used the eightfold jump, used the demonic beasts as a springboard. The demonic beasts could not hurt Nyo Ruowan at all, but she could only create a few clones after using the eightfold jump. On the other hand, there were thousands of demonic beasts. She might not be able to kill them all even if she spent a day killing them. It was not a good idea to continue wasting time like this. Besides, it was also beneficial for them to know the duration of Leonidas' noble phantasm. I'm sorry, my noble phantasm can only last for a short period of time. It's reaching its limit soon. Just like what Leonidas said, his noble phantasm could only last for a short period of time. The reason why Leonidas sacrificed himself to protect his allies at Hot Spring Gate was to give his comrades the opportunity to counterattack. Leonidas believed that they could do it and that they would be able to do it under his protection. His noble phantasm, the guardian of the Flame Gate, also appeared at Hot Spring Gate. However, it could only last for a short period of time. In addition, the demonic beasts were constantly attacking the light barrier. Even if Nuwakamaru started killing the demonic beasts, it was useless. This caused the duration of Leonida's noble phantasm to become shorter and shorter. Leonida originally wanted to revive the morale of his soldiers. He didn't even consider if he could survive this battle. It could be said that Leonida's mentality was exactly the same as Hot Spring Gate. He was already prepared to die. However, there was a difference between this and Hot Spring Gate. This time, there were reinforcements. My noble phantasm is about to disappear. You guys should take this opportunity to retreat. After Leonida finished speaking, his noble phantasm's light barrier began to dim as if it was reaching its limit. Although there were reinforcements, it was still useless against such a large number of demonic beasts. Once the light barrier was broken, they would fall into the demonic beasts with Leonida. What awaited them was only death. Leonida didn't want Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei to die with him. That was why he wanted Nuwakamaru and Musasobo Benkei to retreat while he could still hold on. "No, Mr. Leonida, we don't need to retreat." Musasobo Benkei said something that confused Leonida. Just as Leonidas was about to ask, something unexpected happened. Countless vines rose from the ground outside the north wall and attacked the demonic beasts' abdomens from below. The demonic beasts didn't even have time to scream before they were torn apart by the vines that were still growing. Woo! A strange roar echoed throughout the north wall. This is... Leonida was shocked by the sudden appearance of the vines. But soon, Leonida reacted. He had seen these vines before. They were the vines that blocked the demonic beasts for the incomplete north wall half a year ago. Although it had been half a year, Leonida still remembered it clearly. He couldn't be wrong. The one who did this must be mythical beast Funbaba. Chapter 976. When Leonidas said this name, the ground in the middle of the horde suddenly split open, and a huge green creature that looked like a bear or a deer emerged. This creature was Funbaba. Woo-woo. After Funbaba broke out of the ground, its body was not stained with the slightest bit of dirt. Its huge body stood in the middle of the horde like a crane in a flock of chickens. Leonidas didn't know what to say when he saw this scene. In short, his heart was filled with emotions. This poor monk and Nuwakamaru Sama passed by the abandoned Hyunryong shrine on our way here. At that time, Hyunryong Sama's Funbaba suddenly emerged from the Hyunryong shrine and came with us to the north wall. Musasobo Benkei, who was standing beside Leonidas, explained. It turned out that after Wuming left, Funbaba helped the humans build a wall made of vines and ran to the Hyunryong shrine to hibernate. Wuming didn't think that Funbaba would be able to hibernate in his shrine because there was nothing in the shrine that needed to be taken. In addition, Wuming also heard that the shrine was abandoned, so he didn't go there. This led to Wuming never meeting Funbaba. Although Wuming's shrine was cleaned by Siduri from time to time, because of the horde, Siduri didn't go there often. It could be said that for the past 6 months, she basically didn't go there. It could be said that it was abandoned. After Wuming used Yggdrasil, which was one with Funbaba, through the connection between the two, he accidentally woke up the sleeping Funbaba. Funbaba's arrival at this moment could be said to be a miracle for Leonidas because it gave him hope. This was the end of the Age of the Gods, a time when miracles still existed and mysteries had yet to completely disappear. Because of this, Leonidas did not repeat the mistakes of Hot Spring Gate. The reason why Funbaba didn't make a move before was because it needed time to construct a new vine barrier. Nuwakamaru used his noble phantasm's remaining energy to display his amazing jumping ability. He jumped from the top of Leonidas' noble phantasm and landed steadily beside Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei. The vines that rose from the ground in front of the light continued to thicken and intertwine with each other. Just like Nuwakamaru said, they gradually formed a vine barrier and protected the entire north wall. At this time, Leonidas' noble phantasm couldn't hold on any longer. The light barrier directly dimmed, and the orange-red shield that connected all the light barriers directly shattered. Leonidas staggered, but before Musasobo Benkei could help him, Leonidas used his spear to support himself and stood up straight again. "Are you okay, Your Excellency Leonidas?" Musasobo Benkei couldn't help but ask. The consumption of magic is a bit high. After all, Leonidas' noble phantasm protected the entire north wall, so the consumption of magic was naturally not small. "Since you can still move, then you should be able to kill monsters," Nuwakamaru said as he used his thin green sword to pierce through the gaps of the vine barrier and kill the monsters that continuously attacked the vine barrier one by one. Although this was not the style of a general, at least he didn't have to worry about his life. It saved him time and energy, and he only needed to use his weapon to successfully stab the monsters. After all, this was war, and only victory was the foundation of everything. And with Finbaba's surprise attack, no matter how many magic beasts there were, their efforts would be futile. Due to the impact of Finbaba's appearance, countless monsters around were sent flying. Then, countless monsters swarmed towards Finbaba, who wasn't a monster, and prepared to tear this enemy apart. They were under the influence of Gorgon, and no longer had fear. Even if Finbaba was a mythical monster, they still dared to rush up and kill it. However, even after 2 rounds of strengthening, the monsters were still no match for Finbaba. The only advantage the monsters had was that they became fearless because of Gorgon's final command. If their opponent was a human, perhaps the monster's fearlessness would be extremely terrifying. Unfortunately, the monsters were facing a mythical monster, Finbaba. Woo-woo. Finbaba let out its unique roar while summoning vines from the ground to attack the monsters that approached it. The monsters couldn't get close to Finbaba at all. When they got close, they were either pierced by the vines or crushed by the vines. Countless monsters' blood splashed on the ground, but because of the distance, there wasn't a trace of purple blood within a few meters of Finbaba. It looked like it was handling the situation with ease. At this moment, Finbaba's hind legs were bent, its butt was on the ground, and it was using its forelimbs to support its body. It looked like Finbaba was quite noble. As more and more monsters were killed by Finbaba, Musu Maf, as the monster commander, made his move. The originally stable ground under Finbaba's feet suddenly bulged. Finbaba jumped to avoid the 7 snake heads that were trying to attack it. The vines paved the way for Finbaba. Finbaba wasn't stained by the blood on the ground at all. It changed to another place and used the vines to clean up all the monsters there. Finbaba once again sat down nobly and continued to clean up the monsters. Musu Maf, who broke out from the ground where Finbaba was originally sitting, didn't leave the ground and wasn't in a hurry to attack Finbaba. Instead, it slowly retracted the 7 snake heads back into the ground and hid again. Although Musu Maf was affected by Gorgon, it was different from the mass-produced monsters. It didn't fall into a fanatical state where it didn't fear death. In other words, it could still use its brain. This could be seen from the fact that Musu Maf wanted to attack Finbaba from the ground. However, Finbaba was unmoved. It was just a mere Musu Maf, who was lucky enough to avoid its vines underground. It was simply not enough to be mentioned in the same breath as Finbaba. It must be known that Finbaba was comparable to the heavenly bull Gugalana. Even if it was facing the real Tiamat, the real Finbaba could contend against it, let alone a mere Musu Maf. In Finbaba's view, at the very least, it should let Gorgon, who had Tiamat's authority, be its opponent. Just as Finbaba thought, Musu Maf, who had sneaked into the ground to prepare another sneak attack, was found and entangled by the vines that Finbaba had arranged underground. The struggling Musu Maf drilled out from the ground. There were several injuries on its body. It seemed that it had suffered a big loss from Finbaba. At this time, Gorgon couldn't stand it anymore. Monsters, attack the north wall. Chapter 977. Gorgon ordered again. She told the magical beasts to ignore Finbaba and attack the north wall. Finbaba was just a clown to her. The only thing that mattered was to break through the north wall. Roar! The magical beasts chose to ignore Finbaba. After roaring a few times, they all rushed toward the vine barrier created by Finbaba. Even though Finbaba was still killing the magical beasts, it still couldn't stop the magical beasts from attacking the vine barrier. The vine barrier was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. This made Leonidas, Nuwakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei, who were killing the magical beasts from the gaps in the vine barrier, quite nervous. Damn it, we can't kill them all. Nuwakamaru couldn't help but blurt out in annoyance. After all, there were too many magical beasts. Even if Funbaba could create vines, it wouldn't be able to kill all of them in a short time. Funbaba had been preparing for the vine barrier for a short period of time. If it wanted to create enough vines to kill so many magical beasts, it would take a while for it to prepare. At the moment, whether it was Nuwakamaru, Leonidas, or Musasobo Benkei, they didn't have a good way to deal with the current situation. Since the vine barrier can't stop the magical beasts, we can only change the method. Leonidas suddenly said. Then, he looked at Nuwakamaru. General Nuwakamaru, I have a request. Leonidas said something to Nuwakamaru. Nuwakamaru was stunned for a moment. Even Musasobo Benkei was stunned for a moment. It seems this poor monk was too focused on the battlefield. I actually forgot about this matter. Musasobo Benkei shook his head in self-mockery. But the situation was urgent, so it wasn't the time to chat. Then, I'll go. After Nyo Ruowan finished speaking, he immediately ran towards the north wall as if he was flying. Only Nyo Ruowan and Leonidas were left to continue slaughtering the magical beasts. As for Funbaba, while Funbaba was hesitating, the sound of chains could be heard. A large number of silver-white chains bound Funbaba's body, preventing it from slaughtering the magical beasts. Walala! Funbaba looked up. It was Enkidu. No, it was the fake Enkidu. Funbaba had seen this guy before, so he wasn't unfamiliar with him. Funbaba just didn't know who the other party was. Just a mere beast, behave yourself. Kingu's expression was cold, and the heaven lock that emerged from the ripples around him tightened its grip on Funbaba. However, Funbaba wasn't a god. The heaven lock was just a very strong chain to it. It could easily break free with brute force or skill, such as now. New vines appeared on the ground around Funbaba. These vines didn't attack the magical beasts that were passing by. Instead, they stretched between the heaven lock and Funbaba, slowly expanding the heaven lock that bound Funbaba. Funbaba easily jumped out of it. Walala, after Funbaba broke free, Kingu subconsciously released the heaven lock. The heaven lock turned into golden light and dissipated with the sound of chains. Sure enough, the heaven lock doesn't have much effect on a beast like you. Kingu wasn't surprised by this result. Whether it was himself or Funbaba, he knew that if they really fought, he might not be able to subdue this mythical beast that was stronger than a bull. It was also because of this self-awareness that Kingu's task wasn't to kill or trap Funbaba. His task was only to distract Funbaba and provide cover for others. Rumble, the ground under Funbaba's feet suddenly shattered. A large amount of land fell into a pitch-black abyss, and the area was so large that almost 1/6 of the magical beasts suffered this disaster. Funbaba stepped on the vines that grew out of the ground that hadn't completely collapsed, trying to use them as stepping stones to escape. However, a huge snake tail that was about the same size as Funbaba suddenly stretched out and pulled Funbaba into the ground. If someone paid attention to Gorgon, they would find that Gorgon had disappeared at some point. It was obvious that the collapse of the ground was caused by Gorgon. Ignoring the large-scale collapse of the ground, Kingu knew that Funbaba had been dragged into the ground by Gorgon, and Kingu was providing cover for Gorgon. Funbaba was comparable to a bull, and only Gorgon could defeat it. However, Kingu didn't expect that Gorgon would choose to drag Funbaba into the ground. This wasn't a good thing. After all, other than Gorgon, there was another big enemy that was about to arrive. Silver Meteor. Following the release of a powerful noble phantasm, a bright white beam of light with a hint of gold instantly shot from one end of the vine barrier to the other end of the vine barrier in front of the north wall. All the magical beasts that were within a few dozen meters of the vine barrier were all enveloped by this beam of light. Obviously, these magical beasts were as dead as they could be. After all, this was the so-called light cannon. How could the mass-produced magical beasts withstand it? Jean Gu dared to conclude that this light cannon must have killed more than half of the magical beasts. In addition to the magical beasts that had fallen into the abyss after being attacked indiscriminately by Gorgon, the remaining magical beasts could be said to be the only ones left. Who asked the magical beasts to listen to Gorgon's orders and collectively attack the vine barrier? Their gathering together was advantageous for the other party to release his noble phantasm. Among the magical beasts that were affected, only one of the magical beasts' commanders, Musu Mafu, survived. Even so, 5 of its heads were broken. One of the remaining 2 heads drooped down and was basically dead. The other head, which was the last one, was also bleeding profusely. It seemed like Musu Mafu didn't have the ability to regenerate its snake heads like Gorgon did. Otherwise, it would have been suppressed. I didn't expect that man to have such a powerful anti-city noble phantasm. Kingu was naturally referring to Wuming, but Kingu was wrong. Normally, light cannons were considered anti-city noble phantasms unless they had special effects. However, Wuming's noble phantasm, Silver Meteor, was an anti-evil noble phantasm that he obtained from the suppression force. It wasn't an anti-city noble phantasm. Silver Meteor was only released in the form of a light cannon. Magical beasts could be said to be evil to humans, so naturally, they were also evil to Wuming, who was the guardian of humans. However, even if the other party wasn't evil, with the characteristics of Wuming's noble phantasm, he could forcefully add an evil attribute to the magical beasts. It was just that the magical beasts themselves didn't require Wuming to do so. However, Wuming still felt that this was too much of a coincidence. Chapter 978. This was also the reason why one of the surviving demonic beast commanders, Musu Mafu, was in such a miserable state. If it weren't for the fact that there were too many demonic beasts, which helped Musu Mafu block a portion of the attack, Wuming's attack could have easily killed Musu Mafu. Silently shaking his head, Kingu wanted to give up on these demonic beasts. Anyway, his mother and the new humans were not harmed. As long as his mother came out, this world would be over. No one could stop his mother. Even that man, in Kingu's opinion, could not stop his mother from destroying Mesopotamia and cleansing the human race. After thinking about this, Kingu focused his eyes and looked in Wuming's direction. His mother was a great enemy, so he had to pay attention to her movements. Moreover, he was so far away, so he shouldn't be affected. With Enkidu's powerful eyesight, Kingu easily saw Wuming in the distance, who was holding a broken lightsaber. Ugh! This made Kingu feel a headache again, and he couldn't help but groan. This made Kingu shocked. He was shocked because he still couldn't get used to facing that man, and the situation seemed to be getting worse. At this moment, Gorgon had run underground. This was really bad. In the distance, Wuming removed Meteor Silver's noble phantasm liberation and gathered the broken lightsaber in his right hand, turning the broken lightsaber back into a bright silver knight's sword. After Wuming killed Ba Shilmu and used the divine blade of salvation to clean up the poison in the surroundings, he must have rushed over from the north wall without stopping. However, because Wuming had already sensed Funbaba's aura at the north wall, he was not in a hurry. Therefore, Wuming hid himself and went around to the inconspicuous edge of the north wall, ready to act according to the situation. After all, no matter when, the enemy is in the open while I'm in the dark, was quite advantageous. Coincidentally, Gorgon made the demonic beasts ignore Funbaba and attack the vine barrier instead. This gave Wuming an opportunity. When the demonic beasts rushed up to attack the vine barrier, Wuming directly took out the meteor silver that had accompanied him for a long time and directly released its evil noble phantasm, successfully killing most of the demonic beasts. The reason why Wuming did not use the divine blade of salvation was entirely because in the current situation, meteor silver was more useful than the divine blade of salvation, and also because it had been a long time since Wuming had meteor silver. Although it was a noble phantasm's noble phantasm, it was a noble phantasm had accompanied Wuming was a noble phantasm of salvation. Wuming opened the dragon lair and put away the meteor silver. Then, he raised himself up and took in the entire north wall. After being affected by Gorgon's attack and being blasted down by Wuming's light cannon, the demons attacking the northern wall were almost completely wiped out. At most, there was only a sixth of their original numbers left, and a half-crippled demonic commander. However, even if there were only these demonic beasts left, the number of demonic beasts was still considerable, at least to the humans. However, Wyrm had already helped them a lot, and it was impossible for him to continue helping them. After all, if the humans were to completely rely on God, Gilgamesh's will of separation between man and God would probably die directly. Therefore, the remaining demonic beasts could only be eliminated by the humans themselves. In addition, Wyrm had a more important point. Wyrm saw the fake Enkidu that seemed to be Kingu. Wyrm had a feeling that the other party must be an extraordinary existence in this singularity. Perhaps the other party was hiding some secrets that Wyrm did not know about, such as Tiamat. Wyrm immediately flew towards Enkidu. When Enkidu noticed Wyrm coming over, he immediately dived into the bottomless abyss that was opened up by Gorgon. Wyrm stopped above the bottomless abyss, then glanced at Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei who were protected by vines. After nodding to the two of them, Wyrm did not hesitate and dived into the abyss. "Let's go, Mr. Bianqing. This place will be broken soon. We should retreat." The vine barrier was consumed by the previous magical beasts. It was estimated that it would not last long. If they continued to stay, then they would be swallowed up by the remaining magical beasts. As they understood before, even if the number of magical beasts was consumed, the number of magical beasts would still pose a threat to humans. However, they could rely on the north wall to deal with the current number of beasts. Silent understood this point. That's why he gave Leonidas the task of dealing with the beasts outside the north wall. That's why he nodded to Leonidas earlier. Leonidas and Musasobo Benkei saw that sporadic magical beasts had entered through the gap in the vine barrier. They immediately returned to the north wall. Wyrm couldn't help but frown as he went deeper into the abyss created by Gorgon's destruction. He had not reached the bottom yet. Did Gorgon directly penetrate the underworld when he destroyed the underground? Wyrm couldn't help but ask. It wasn't Wyrm's fault. After all, the deeper they went, the colder it got. The surrounding rocks gradually became similar to the underworld. But if that was the case, then Wyrm had doubts. Why did Ereshkigal move the underworld here? There weren't many underworld that followed Ereshkigal to the Mesopotamia. Most of the land was centered around Kuza city. Although Ereshkigal could move the underworld, but there was no need to move the underworld outside the north wall. It was too strange. The deeper Wyrm went, the more he felt that this was indeed the underworld. Because, he saw the spear cages inserted into the ground. There were still sporadic garrulous spirits. It's a little troublesome. Although Wyrm guessed that Ereshkigal was on the side of the humans, but she used the same method as the Quetzalcoatl to cause her to stand on the opposite side of the humans. But, for now, Ereshkigal was still a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance. Gorgon and Funbaba broke in, plus Kingu who escaped Wyrm into the underworld, and Wyrm who chased after Kingu. With so many extraordinary beings breaking into the underworld, Ereshkigal was bound to be dissatisfied. These beings who entered the underworld could be regarded as Ereshkigal's enemies. Even if Ereshkigal's temper was good, she was still the queen who controlled the underworld. More importantly, Gorgon brought people to attack the underworld. Ereshkigal might be angry because of this. Just like now. Boom. Chapter 979. The violent tremors shook the entire underworld. It was as if the Lord of the Underworld was enraged. And this angry Lord of the Underworld could only be Ereshkigal. Sure enough, she's angry. Wyrm couldn't help but nod. He was right. It was like a person who liked to live alone. If several uninvited guests suddenly broke into this person's house, and they were the kind that fought, if Wyrm was that person, Wyrm would definitely be angry. And once a master who had almost perfect absolute power in the home got angry, the consequences were really unimaginable. It was fine if something happened to Gorgon because of Ereshkigal's anger. After all, he was an enemy. Wyrm's main concern was Funbaba. Funbaba was like a pet to Wuming, and also like a partner. The Funbaba that had fused with Yggdrasil was also Wuming's weapon. No matter what, Wuming could not let anything happen to Funbaba. With this thought in mind, Wuming sped up a little. After a while, Wuming finally left the long passage and really came to the underworld. Then, he landed on a broken stone pillar. Wuming looked at the dim underworld. It was still the same realm filled with stone pillars and stone bridges, and it gave people a feeling that it was endless. And such a common scene would make people feel despair and death. The underworld is really full of death everywhere. Wuming couldn't help but sigh. This was the second time Wuming came to the underworld, but Wuming could only say simple and specific words like desolation and death in Wuming's evaluation. After all, no matter who it was, when they saw a world that looked like it was dead, they would have such a feeling. Moreover, because the underworld had not seen the sun all year round, no, it should be because there was no sun since ancient times, countless death aura filled the entire underworld. If an ordinary living person entered the underworld by mistake, he would probably die in a few minutes. Even Gadotsi, who was equipped with the new magic dress invented by Da Vinci, would not last long. In a sense, preventing living creatures from entering the underworld could be regarded as saving others' lives in disguise. Although there were no living creatures in the underworld, there were many moving objects, such as the Garrula spirit, the Soul Reaper. Of course, there were also some resentful spirits that had left the spear cage and walked in the underworld because of the disrepair of the spear cage. Moreover, the land of the underworld also had no other landscape except for stones. In the absence of animals, it was even more impossible for plants to exist in the underworld. To be honest, the underworld that did not even have a single flower was a little pitiful. In short, Ereshkigal's spear cage inserted into the ground could be regarded as a unique landscape in the underworld. However, Wuming did not have time to appreciate these landscapes. It was more important to get down to business. Wuming flew quickly toward a place below where the concentration of magic power was obviously different from other places. After crossing a large number of stone bridges, climbing over countless stone pillars, and passing by a few stone platforms, Wuming even bypassed a huge stone pillar that could be called a mountain. Finally, Wuming arrived at his destination. Wuming vaguely saw the figure of Funbaba on Gorgon. Not only that, but Wuming also vaguely saw the phantom of a huge Garrula spirit. It seemed to be Ereshkigal. However, because of the death aura in the underworld, it had the effect of interfering with Wuming's vision, making Wuming unable to see clearly. But since he could not see clearly, he would take a closer look. He sped up and broke through the death aura of the underworld. The scene in the deepest part of the underworld was reflected in Wuming's eyes. Then, Wuming could not help but be shocked. This was an extremely desolate and empty site without the slightest building. There was only desolation and vastness. However, this desolation made this site seem wider. However, this place was indeed larger than any platform Wuming had seen on the road. It was not a visual error, but Wuming's true judgment. Whether it was Gorgon, Funbaba, or the huge Garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal, the three were not small, but when they were in this desolate open space at this moment, they did not seem crowded at all. On the contrary, they seemed quite small. However, Wuming was not surprised by this, but the situation at the scene. Funbaba was lying on the side obediently, which made Wuming breathe a sigh of relief. The huge Garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal stabbed the light spear in her hand into the ground. Her body was still trembling slightly, and she seemed to be struggling. As for Gorgon, he was the one that surprised Wuming the most. The black mud completely covered Gorgon's body. The black mud, which could be considered a liquid, was constantly flowing on Gorgon's body, giving people the feeling that it was a lump of black mud in the shape of Gorgon that could flow on its own. However, Wuming was sure that this was Gorgon. Not to mention Gorgon's huge body, Funbaba entered the underworld with Gorgon. What's more, as the lord of the underworld, Ereshkigal was personally present. This lump of black mud was definitely Gorgon. However, how did Gorgon become like this? Wuming was used to Gorgon's changes due to the black mud from time to time, but the change this time was really not trivial. Those who did not know would think that this was really a lump of black mud. Not only that, but Gorgon was also surrounded by huge stones, and the black mud on Gorgon's body seemed to be restricted, unable to flow out of the circle formed by these stones. At that moment, Wuming saw what was going on. Gorgon should have been restricted by Ereshkigal using the authority of the underworld, but judging from Ereshkigal's situation, she seemed to be struggling quite a bit. Perhaps the restriction on Gorgon would not last long, and Funbaba should know that it could not help much, so it lay on the side and rested. However, just as Wuming was thinking, Funbaba, who discovered Wuming, immediately got up and ran over. Woo woo woo! Funbaba directly rubbed its big green fur face against Wuming, and it also made a cheerful cry. This could be said to be the first time Funbaba and Wuming officially met after being separated for so long. Although it was in the underworld, Funbaba was still very happy. Now that Funbaba discovered Wuming, Ereshkigal naturally also discovered the existence of Wuming. Xian. Hyunryong. Ereshkigal's huge Garrula spirit couldn't help but cry out. If only listening to the voice, it was somewhat similar to Ishtar's voice, and more importantly, this voice was full of panic, which made people feel that it was quite cute. However, Wuming who heard this voice was directly stunned. What's with Ereshkigal's girlish voice? Chapter 980. Ereshkigal? Wuming asked doubtfully, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Any intellectual existence could see that Wuming was very confused at the moment. Funbaba was like this, and Ereshkigal was even more so. However, this was something that couldn't be helped. Wuming had only seen Ereshkigal once. It was when he met Ereshkigal in the underworld near Abyff Mountain. At that time, Ereshkigal's voice sounded full of majesty. It was completely in line with the titles of the Mistress of the Underworld and the Queen of the Garrula Spirit. But the voice that Ereshkigal made just now could be said to be completely different from the voice that Ereshkigal made before. It was like two different people. If Wuming wasn't sure that the other party was indeed Ereshkigal, Wuming suspected that Ereshkigal was disguised by Ishtar. After all, Ereshkigal's voice was too similar to Ishtar's. Ahem. Sure enough, you also came to my underworld, Hyunryong. After hearing Wuming's questioning voice, Ereshkigal immediately adjusted her voice and returned to the previous queen-like way of speaking. Seeing that Ereshkigal changed her voice, Wuming didn't pursue this matter anymore. After all, Funbaba is my partner, and Gorgon is my enemy. I have to come over. As Wuming said, Funbaba rubbed against Wuming again. However, Ereshkigal sneered at this, but not at the relationship between Funbaba and Wuming, but at the uninvited provocation of Wuming and the others. You know, this is my underworld. You can't come in casually, whether it's a human or a god. The last time I let you and the goddess of greed leave was entirely because of your special identity, but this doesn't mean that you can come in my underworld whenever you want. In the blink of an eye, a large amount of mana was released from the Garrula spirit's body, forming a shockwave that caused the surrounding temperature to drop even lower. Ereshkigal's demeanor as the mistress of the underworld could be said to be vividly displayed. However, Wuming didn't care and even wanted to laugh. However, this made Ereshkigal feel that Wuming was insulting her, so she became even angrier. The temperature of the underworld dropped again, and a layer of frost rose on Funbaba's hair. Wuming even felt a trace of coldness. This made Wuming look at Ereshkigal in a new light. But at the same time, Wuming's smile became more intense. However, Wuming's smile was not because of Wuming's arrogance. Wuming was full of smiles because of Ereshkigal. You'd better save some magic power to deal with Gorgon. As soon as Wuming said this, the huge Garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal couldn't help but tremble. Ereshkigal understood what Wuming meant. He instantly saw her current difficulty. Restraining Gorgon, who was completely stained with black mud at this moment, already made Ereshkigal suffer. For the sake of her face, she diverted some magic power to deal with Wyrm. This was a huge burden for Ereshkigal. Adding hail to snow was light. Therefore, Wyrm's smile was not mocking Ereshkigal for being half-hearted at this time. Wyrm just felt that Ereshkigal was a little like Ishtar. For a long time, Ishtar had made humans worry a lot, but it was only to the extent of worry. Humans did not have hatred for Ishtar. In other words, Ishtar was not an evil god. At best, she was just a good god who kept doing evil. As mentioned before, Ishtar was the mistress of the sky and the most beloved daughter of the gods. Even if there were some reasons that caused Ishtar to start doing evil, those evil were still some evil that was not serious. For example, in the myths, Dumas and Nelgal were tricked by Ishtar into the underworld and paid a certain price. But overall, the two were gods, so the price was nothing. Even if it was more extreme, they could be resurrected after death. Also, Ishtar was humiliated by Gilgamesh and released the bull of heaven to wreak havoc on the earth for 7 years, causing the humans in Mesopotamia to have no harvest. But Ishtar only let the bull of heaven to wreak havoc on the earth, and did not let it kill humans. It could be said that as the mistress of the sky, Ishtar was completely a barbaric princess who often indulged herself but had a certain level of propriety. Although Ishtar's propriety was very low, in short, in Wyrm's view, as a god who was the same divinity as Ishtar, but with a different side of divinity, Ereshkigal was not that bad. Ereshkigal's position in the myths was an evil god. She was the ruler of death and corruption, the queen of the underworld who ruled over the underworld. She was an evil god who was feared by humans. Before he met Ereshkigal, Wyrm originally thought that Ereshkigal was an evil god who was described by the world. But after their last encounter, Wyrm discovered that Ereshkigal actually loved humans very much. She was just prepared to use methods that the world could not accept to save humans, just like the feathered serpent god. And Ereshkigal's panicked voice to Wyrm just now exposed some information about Ereshkigal, such as her sternness was fake. Ereshkigal was probably different from how she appeared and the myths that the world spread. Wyrm felt that Ereshkigal was probably a goddess who was very easy to talk to. Ereshkigal and Ishtar were different sides of the same divinity. Ishtar was the mistress of the sky, a goddess who was in charge of harvest, a goddess who represented life, while Ereshkigal was the mistress of the underworld, a goddess who was in charge of corruption and death, a power that was undoubtedly feared. The powers of the two were opposite to each other to a certain extent. Since that was the case, their personalities might also be opposite. For example, Ishtar was the opposite of, not easy to talk to at all and very arrogant, but Ereshkigal became, very easy to talk to and kind to people. Wyrm guessed that the world's fear of Ereshkigal was probably only because Ereshkigal was in charge of death, and Ereshkigal did not defend herself. Therefore, the human understanding of Ereshkigal stopped at, a terrifying goddess. But because of this, Ereshkigal, who pretended to be cold and acted like a child in order to maintain the image that the world described, how could Wyrm not feel gratified, amused, and laughed? Chapter 981. However, just 2 meetings could not prove anything at all. After all, these were just Wyrm's guesses. Although they were close to the correct answer, guesses were still guesses. Before obtaining real information and hearing the truth from Ereshkigal, Wyrm would not make a judgment easily. At that moment, Wyrm no longer thought about this. Instead, he turned to pay attention to Gorgon. After all, Gorgon was quite attractive at the moment, but this attractive referred to the dangerous aspect. To understand Gorgon's situation, asking the person involved, Ereshkigal, was the most direct and effective way. Therefore, Wyrm spoke directly. Ereshkigal, before I arrived, what happened to Gorgon? If he wanted to deal with Gorgon, he had to know what happened to him to become like this. If he was not careful, the root of the black mud was likely to flow into the underworld. At this moment, Gorgon was already an accident, and Wyrm did not want another accident to happen. The giant Garrula spirit transformed by Ereshkigal glanced at Wyrm. Although its huge skeletal eyes did not have eyeballs, Wuming could feel that Ereshkigal was indeed glaring at him, as if to say, "You are really rude." However, Ereshkigal finally told Wuming the truth. The battle between Gorgon and Funbaba disturbed the garrulous spirit and affected the peace of the underworld. However, because of the suppression of the underworld, the two were only fighting with brute force, and it did not cause much damage to the underworld. After all, the underworld suppressed divinity. Although Funbaba did not have divinity, it was not a living thing, in a sense after fusing with Yggdrasil, so it would also be suppressed to a certain extent. However, the size of the two was there, and it did not matter if their abilities were suppressed. The result was just as Ereshkigal said, it became a situation of fighting with brute force. After that, I showed up and used the authority of the underworld to suppress Funbaba and Gorgon. Even if the three goddesses' alliance was a cooperative relationship on the surface, it was a fact that Gorgon broke into Ereshkigal's territory and started a fight. However, because he did not attack Ereshkigal, Gorgon was not punished by the three goddesses' alliance. On the other hand, Ereshkigal used the authority of the underworld to suppress Ereshkigal and did not cause any harm to her. In addition, it was indeed Gorgon who broke into the territory of the other goddesses, so the alliance did not punish Ereshkigal. In this contradictory situation where both sides made mistakes and neither side was wrong, simply put, Gorgon would be suppressed in the underworld, but Ereshkigal could not hurt Gorgon. But for some reason, Gorgon showed signs of resisting the suppression of the underworld. It should be known that any god who entered the underworld would be suppressed, and Ereshkigal was a god who was born to manage the underworld. She was even given the authority to be invincible in the underworld. Therefore, the active suppression personally implemented by Ereshkigal was more absolute than the passive suppression of non-living beings by the underworld. According to what Ereshkigal said, Gorgon and Funbaba fought with brute force. It could be seen that the suppression of the underworld was indeed effective on Gorgon. However, the passive suppression of the underworld was effective on Gorgon, and the active and stronger suppression personally implemented by Ereshkigal on Gorgon was actually resisted by Gorgon. Most importantly, the agreement of the three goddesses' alliance was still in place, so how could Gorgon have the ability to resist? Hearing Ereshkigal's words, Wuming could not help but look at the origin black soil that completely covered Gorgon. The only existence that could make Gorgon resist Ereshkigal's authority was the origin black soil. After that, a lot of black matter emerged from Gorgon's body. Not only did it completely envelop Gorgon, but it also directly broke my suppression on Gorgon. Ugh. Ereshkigal, who said this, had a hint of panic, like a little girl who was pretending to be strong and was about to cry when she encountered an unsolvable problem. Ereshkigal's instantaneous breaking of the suppression made Wuming look at Ereshkigal in shock again. Moreover, this also made Wuming feel that his previous guess was right. However, the huge skeletal face of Ereshkigal, which was transformed into the giant Garrula spirit, did not show any emotion at all. And Ereshkigal probably also realized that she had broken the suppression again, so she quickly adjusted her tone and changed the topic. Ahem. The reason why I can suppress Gorgon now is because I obtained the result at the cost of my divinity, but the effect is still quite forceful. Wuming could not help but be stunned. It turned out that Ereshkigal had used her own divinity as the price to barely suppress Gorgon, and Ereshkigal, who was constantly consuming her divinity, would definitely not be able to hold on for long. This was the reason why Ereshkigal looked like she was struggling. No matter how stupid Ereshkigal was, she could see that this black mud was not something good. If this stuff flowed into the underworld, not to mention the harm it would cause, just cleaning it up would make Ereshkigal vexed for a while. The black mud is extremely corrosive. Inanimate objects are basically unaffected, but living objects might be an exception. If you allow the black mud to flow into the underworld, you'd better be prepared to give up on the underworld. Wuming's inanimate objects and living objects naturally referred to inanimate objects and living objects in a broad sense. For example, inanimate objects were the underworld, and living objects were the Garrula spirit. Wuming guessed that the black mud, which came from the same source as him, should also have the ability to ignore rules. It was precisely this ability that made Ereshkigal's suppression ineffective against Gorgon. Even if it could not compare to Wuming's ability to ignore the rules of the underworld, it was still very likely that Gorgon, who was engulfed by the black mud, could ignore the rules of the underworld of a world. However, Wuming's words gave Ereshkigal a fright. Huh? Is this thing so terrifying? But come to think of it, this thing attached to Gorgon allowed Gorgon to easily break through Ereshkigal's suppression. In the end, Ereshkigal had to pay the price of divinity to suppress Gorgon. Ereshkigal could naturally see that the black mud was different, but she did not expect Wuming to say such serious words. Therefore, Ereshkigal became a little dissatisfied. What do you mean by that? Chapter 982. To be honest, Wuming's words made Ereshkigal a little unhappy. What did he mean by giving up the underworld? As the mistress of the underworld, Ereshkigal seemed to have unlimited power. She held the authority of the underworld and could be said to be an invincible existence in the underworld. However, the disadvantage was quite obvious. Ereshkigal could not leave the underworld. It was not that Ereshkigal was unwilling to leave the underworld. She had no choice. As the cornerstone of the underworld's birth, Ereshkigal used the condition of not being able to leave the underworld in exchange for the effect of being invincible in the underworld. Because it was not Ereshkigal's initiative, it was comparable to a curse. The underworld had only stones and the garrulous spirit. It was also dark all year round. No matter what, Ereshkigal was a girl. How could she be willing to stay here? It was only for the sake of responsibility. However, this was not the main point. The main point was that Ereshkigal and the underworld were closely related. It was not an exaggeration to say that the two had a symbiotic relationship. However, Wuming asked her to give up the underworld. What was the difference between that and asking her to die? In this regard, Wuming explained. It's just an if. Don't be nervous. I won't let things develop to the point where the master of the underworld has no choice but to give up the underworld, Wuming said confidently. Wuming did not want to let Gorgon leave the underworld alive today. As Wuming spoke, he took out the divine blade of salvation from the golden ripples and flew toward Gorgon's huge body that was engulfed by the black mud. Did he really come down just to find the Fanbaba? Did he have no intention of getting rid of Gorgon? The answer was, of course, that he did. Due to the backlash from Tiamat's authority and the origin black soil, Gorgon's entire god had become somewhat abnormal. If Wuming had to make an analogy, it would be that Gorgon had transformed from an avenger to a madman. If he continued to let Gorgon run free, something could happen to him. Furthermore, the magical beast army had mobilized in full force. Taking this opportunity to annihilate the enemy was the best course of action. How long can you suppress Gorgon? Wuming suddenly asked Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal didn't react for a moment. Can you suppress Gorgon, who might go berserk because of the threat of death? Ahem. Hyunryong, your self-righteous attitude is really annoying. Ereshkigal cleared her throat and unhappily replied to Wuming. Please answer truthfully. This is related to the following plan, as well as the situation of you and the underworld. At this moment, Wuming was like a god. His expression was rather serious, and his tone was filled with an undeniable charm. Perhaps Wuming didn't mean this, but only the strong could decide everything. Wuming had a way to get rid of Gorgon. Since that was the case, he had to be stronger than Ereshkigal. Probably due to Ereshkigal's natural mischief, she didn't realize that the atmosphere between her and Wuming had gradually become one of a superior and subordinate. She only decided that Wuming had suddenly become much more serious. Wuming's sudden seriousness made Ereshkigal a little overwhelmed. It was just like how Ishtar faced Wuming. However, compared to Ishtar's grievance toward Wuming, Ereshkigal felt more uneasy toward Wuming. At that moment, Ereshkigal also subconsciously ignored the fact that she continued to dress up as the goddess of fear and directly communicated with Wuming in her original voice. If I suppress her like this, I can suppress her until my divinity completely disappears. The pure girl's voice came from the huge Garrula spirit. It was slightly out of place, but Wuming's attention was no longer on this. He was paying attention to Ereshkigal's answer. The first half of the sentence made Wuming quite satisfied, but the second half of Ereshkigal's answer made Wuming stunned. As for whether I can suppress Gorgon who went berserk due to the threat of death, I don't know, Ereshkigal answered Wuming rather weakly. Probably because of her lack of confidence, Ereshkigal's last few words were pitifully soft. Fortunately, Wuming's hearing was good. However, Wuming hoped that he heard wrong. What do you mean you don't know? Wuming frowned. Ereshkigal's answer was related to the survival of the underworld. She gave Wuming an ambiguous answer like, I don't know. How could Wuming deal with Gorgon next? Wuming was going to stab Gorgon's heart with the divine blade of salvation and use the power of the source in the divine blade of salvation to kill Gorgon as the core. In this way, these source black mud without a core were equivalent to lambs waiting to be slaughtered by Wuming. For the current Wuming to deal with the ownerless source black mud, Wuming expressed that it was a piece of cake. However, that was based on the assumption that Gorgon would not break Ereshkigal's suppression due to the threat of death. Although Wuming could still kill Gorgon, if Gorgon, as the source of the source black mud, broke through Ereshkigal's suppression and allowed the black mud to flow into the underworld, it would be quite troublesome to deal with the aftermath. In the event of an accident, Ereshkigal, who could not leave the underworld, might become the core of the next source black mud. Although Wuming and Ereshkigal had only met twice, Wuming had a good impression of Ereshkigal. Wuming did not want Ereshkigal to become his enemy. Of course, even if the source black mud flowed into the underworld after Gorgon broke through Ereshkigal's suppression, Wuming had a way to get rid of the source black mud. However, in that case, the underworld would probably be affected as well. In the best case, it would be half destroyed, and in the worst case, it would cease to exist. After all, there were not many underworlds that followed Ereshkigal back to the Mesopotamia. If Wuming carried out the cleansing indiscriminately, the underworld that returned with Ereshkigal would probably disappear. In that case, Ereshkigal would probably also leave. The curse of only being able to stay in the underworld was no joke. Without the underworld, Ereshkigal would undoubtedly leave. Wuming did not want to kill the enemy by sacrificing people who might become allies. What was the difference between that and killing the criminal along with the hostage? If that was the case, Wuming might as well let the black mud enter the underworld and erode Ereshkigal. Anyway, the result would be that Ereshkigal would leave because of Wuming. It would be the same no matter which side it was. Therefore, Wuming asked Ereshkigal if she could suppress Gorgon who might go berserk. Wuming wanted to use the method with the least loss. After all, the three goddesses' alliance was the enemy of mankind. Gilgamesh would probably happily say something like, "Isn't it great to take this opportunity to destroy the two pillars of the three goddesses' alliance?" However, since Wuming saw that Ereshkigal did indeed have another hidden side, Wuming would not do that. Chapter 983. Ereshkigal was obviously hiding something. Since Wuming did not kill the feathered serpent god when he captured her, and instead chose to rope her in after learning about her secrets, then Wuming would not attack Ereshkigal either. Wuming would make a decision after fully understanding Ereshkigal's situation. If Ereshkigal was really hiding something, then Wuming would try his best to rope in Ereshkigal. If Ereshkigal was just an evil god, then Wuming could punish her later. To put it simply, Wuming actually wanted to see a so-called happy ending. From this point of view, it was not surprising that Wuming and Merlin could become friends. I definitely know that these black things are up to no good, but they are Gorgon. She is a member of the Three Goddesses Alliance, just like me. Even if I can use my divinity to suppress Gorgon, there is no way I can suppress Gorgon who went berserk because of the threat of death. Ereshkigal refuted Wuming, feeling wronged. It was not that Ereshkigal did not know what was good for her. At this point, how could Ereshkigal not realize the seriousness of the problem? Just from the moment she had to use her divinity to suppress Gorgon, Ereshkigal realized that the problem was probably very serious. It was just that the person who made Ereshkigal realize this was the person who made it clear to her was Wyrm. But she really could not do Wyrm's request. Wyrm fell silent and could not help but sigh. Then, he turned to look at Gorgon. The black mud on Gorgon's body was like a living thing, and it was still squirming. Even the underworld, which was so eerie that it could not be described as a scenery, was ruined by it. However, Gorgon himself seemed to be steadily suppressed by Ereshkigal and did not seem to want to break free. From Ereshkigal's answer, Wyrm was clear of two things. Ereshkigal was not as powerful as he imagined, and Gorgon's origin black mud was the same. Ereshkigal used the sacrifice divinity to suppress Gorgon, which meant that the origin black mud was not very effective in the hands of Gorgon. At least, Wyrm could easily suppress Gorgon. And Ereshkigal did not have the confidence to suppress Gorgon, who was likely to go berserk under the threat of death. This proved that Ereshkigal's suppression was not foolproof. In this case, it also meant that there might be uncertainty in Ereshkigal's words. For example, when she said that, "I can continue to suppress Gorgon until my divinity completely disappears," there might also be uncertainty. Maybe in the next second, Ereshkigal's suppression on Gorgon would be broken. At that moment, Wyrm no longer thought about it. The saying, "a long delay means trouble," was very reasonable. Wyrm flew directly to Gorgon's heart, raised the blade of salvation in his hand, and aimed it at Gorgon's heart. Wyrm was ready to smash a broken pot. Everything would work out when the time came. Anyway, he had smashed such a broken pot many times, so this time would not make a difference. Hey. Don't be impulsive. I don't have the confidence to suppress Gorgon. Ereshkigal originally wanted to discuss with Wyrm if there was any other way. In the end, Wyrm rushed directly to Gorgon's heart, seemingly ready to directly stab that extraordinary weapon into Gorgon's heart. But what if Gorgon goes berserk? What if the black substance pollutes the underworld? Weren't you very worried before? Why are you suddenly not worried? A happy ending. Why don't you care about my life and death? Isn't this too cruel? Don't worry, my luck has always been very good. Wyrm's implication was that with his luck, even if it was a broken pot, he could still smash it into a good pot. Ha! Ereshkigal was dumbfounded. Wyrm dared to gamble, but Ereshkigal did not dare to gamble. Could he be more reliable? However, Wyrm ignored Ereshkigal. Instead, he directly injected an unprecedented amount of magic power into the divine blade of salvation. Perhaps it was because the underworld was extremely dark, but the divine blade of salvation also emitted an unprecedented light. Suddenly, the entire underworld seemed to be illuminated by sunlight. The underworld, which had never seen the light of day from the beginning, was illuminated by light. The garrulous spirits hiding in the shadows were attracted by the light that scattered into the underworld, but because of the attribute restriction, they could not really touch the sunlight. They could only hide in the shadows and yearn for life. Even the undead yearned for the light full of life. No, it was more accurate to say that it was precisely because the undead had lost their lives that they yearned for the light that represented life. Not only the garrulous spirits, but Ereshkigal also had a change in her soul. My underworld is filled with light. Legend had it that Ereshkigal had no desires, but no one in the world could truly have no desires, not even the gods. The reason why Ereshkigal had no desires was because she knew that her desires were impossible to achieve. Over time, many of the desires that Ereshkigal desired were either forgotten by Ereshkigal or buried in the bottom of Ereshkigal's heart. Among them, illuminating the underworld with light was one of Ereshkigal's desires. All of a sudden, the huge garrulous spirit disappeared, and a blonde girl wearing a black and red cotton cloak and holding a spear of light appeared where the huge garrulous spirit had disappeared. If Wyrm looked back now, he would find that the blonde girl's face and Ishtar's face were exactly the same. The two could be said to be sharing the same object. However, Wyrm was not in the mood to pay attention to this at the moment. Like a wet blanket, he stabbed the divine blade of salvation straight into Gorgon's heart. Before stabbing, Wyrm shouted at Ereshkigal without looking back. Ereshkigal, prepare to welcome Gorgon's rampage. Hey hey hey. Accompanied by Wyrm's stern words and Ereshkigal's panicked voice, Gorgon, who was covered in black mud, began to struggle violently. The platform where the two were on began to shake violently. The stone pillar that Ereshkigal used to suppress Gorgon gradually cracked and then suddenly broke. Kacha, kacha, kacha. In just one exchange, almost half of the dozen huge stone pillars that suppressed Gorgon broke. Although the remaining half of the stone pillars were still intact, there were also cracks. With all the stone pillars broken, it was only a matter of time before Gorgon broke free. Please, Meslamtia. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.